Hello, and welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We're really excited to share today's story with you, and we're grateful you could join us. Let's not waste any more time, let's get into it. Donald Gill's truck rumbled to a stop in the driveway of his suburban home. The 45-year-old civil engineer sat for a moment, his calloused hands still gripping the steering wheel. The unexpected equipment malfunction at the project site had thrown his week into disarray, but it was the gnawing feeling in his gut that truly unsettled him. He killed the engine, the sudden silence broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Then he heard it, a muffled giggle from an open upstairs window. The sound hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. He knew that laugh. It was Lucille's, his wife of 20 years, but it held a carefree quality he hadn't heard directed at him in ages. Donald moved with the quiet precision of a man who'd spent decades on construction sites. He eased the front door open, thankful for the recent WD-40 application that silenced its usual creak. The giggle came again, louder now, emanating from their bedroom upstairs. "Oh, Jason, you're terrible." Lucille's voice floated down, a mixture of mock outrage and barely contained mirth. Jason. The name lodged in Donald's brain like a splinter. He knew a Jason, Lucille's yoga instructor, young, fit, with an easy smile that Donald had always found a touch too ingratiating. His eyes fell on Lucille's phone, carelessly left on the kitchen counter. The little voice of morality that had guided him since his Boy Scout days put up a token resistance, but it was quickly silenced. Donald picked up the device, relieved to find it unlocked. What he saw made his vision blur. Months of flirtatious text messages, each more intimate than the last. Photos that seared themselves into his memory. Compromising images of his wife in poses she never shared with him. Credit card statements showing expenses at high-end restaurants and hotel bookings on days Lucille had claimed to be working late. Donald's legal training kicked in, overriding the urge to storm upstairs and confront them. Evidence. He needed evidence. With practiced efficiency, he connected the phone to his laptop and began copying everything to a secure cloud drive. As he worked, Donald's mind raced through the past few months. The late nights at the gallery, the sudden interest in yoga, the way Lucille's eyes would dart away when he asked about her day. It all fit together now, a jigsaw puzzle of betrayal. He finished the data transfer just as he heard footsteps on the stairs. Donald quickly replaced the phone and moved to the living room, feigning nonchalance as he pretended to rifle through his work bag. Lucille breezed in, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly mussed. "Donald, you're home early. Is everything okay at the site?" He looked at her, this woman he'd shared his life with for over 2 decades, and felt a chill settle in his chest. "Equipment malfunction," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing we can't handle." Lucille nodded, a flicker of relief passing over her features. "Well, I'm glad you're home. I was just about to start dinner. Any requests?" Donald shook his head, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Whatever you want is fine. I've got some work to catch up on." As Lucille turned towards the kitchen, Donald retreated to his home office. He sat heavily in his chair, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He knew what he had to do next, but the thought filled him with a cold, hard anger he'd never experienced before. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur for Donald. On the surface, life continued as normal. He went to work, came home, shared meals with Lucille. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a storm was brewing. Donald sat in a nondescript cafe, his fingers drumming nervously on the tabletop. Across from him sat Orlando Campbell, a man whose profession thrived on discretion. "Mr. Gill," Orlando began, his voice low and measured, "I've compiled the information you requested." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Donald's hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. "And you're certain about all of this?" Orlando nodded gravely. "Every bit of it is documented and verified. Photos times locations. It's all there." With a deep breath, Donald opened the envelope. The contents confirmed his worst fears. Photographic evidence of Lucille and Jason's rendezvous at various locations, hotels, restaurants, even a secluded park bench. Each image was like a dagger to his heart. "There's more," Orlando continued. "I did some digging on this Jason character. Turns out, he has a history of affairs with married women from his yoga classes. At least 3 confirmed in the past 2 years." Donald's jaw clenched. And Lucille? Her work. Orlando's expression turned grim. "She's been skipping work to meet him, Mr. Gill. It's jeopardizing her position at the art gallery." Donald nodded, a cold determination settling over him. "Thank you, Orlando. You've been thorough." As he left the cafe, Donald's mind was already racing ahead. He needed legal advice, and he knew just who to call. Kenneth Noble's office was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, a stark contrast to the chaos Donald felt inside. His longtime friend and attorney listened intently as Donald laid out the situation, spreading Orlando's evidence across the polished desk. "Jesus, Don," Kenneth said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm so sorry. Are you sure about this? No chance of reconciliation?" Donald's laugh was hollow. "Ken, you've seen the evidence. This isn't a one-time thing. It's been going on for months. And it's not just the affair. She's been lying about work, risking her job. I need to know my options." Kenneth nodded, his expression grave. "All right, then let's talk strategy. First things first, we need to protect your assets. Have you separated your finances yet?" "Started to," Donald replied. "I've been moving funds to secure accounts, but I didn't want to raise suspicion by doing too much at once." "Good thinking," Kenneth approved. "We'll need to document everything. Lucille's spending, her absences from work, any neglect of household responsibilities. What about your daughter, Amber? How's she factoring into all this?" Donald's face darkened. "Lucille's been skipping Amber's parent-teacher conferences, claiming work commitments. I've been picking up the slack, but I'm worried about how this will affect her." Kenneth made a note. "That's good. Shows Lucille's priorities aren't with the family. Now, let's talk about gathering admissible evidence." As they delved into the legal intricacies, Donald felt a grim sense of purpose settling over him. He'd been betrayed, yes, but he'd be damned if he'd let Lucille walk away unscathed. The next few days passed in a haze of covert financial maneuvering and evidence gathering. Donald felt like he was living a double life. Dutiful husband by night, wronged man plotting his next move by day. Friday evening arrived, heavy with anticipation. Donald had prepared a dossier of evidence, photos, text messages, financial records, all neatly organized and devastatingly thorough. As he heard Lucille's key in the lock, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Lucille bustled in, arms full of groceries. "Hey, honey, I thought we could have a nice dinner tonight. I picked up some of that wine you like." Donald watched her move around the kitchen, her domesticity a stark contrast to the evidence of her deceit, sitting in a folder on his lap. "Sounds great," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Why do we sit down and talk while it's cooking?" Lucille glanced at him, a flicker of something worry, guilt, crossing her face before she smiled. "Of course. Everything okay?" They settled at the dining room table, the folder between them like a ticking time bomb. Donald looked at his wife, really looked at her, and for a moment he saw the young woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Then the image of her wrapped around Jason flashed in his mind, and his resolve hardened. "Lucille," he began, his voice steady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What's your relationship with Jason?" The color drained from Lucille's face, but she quickly composed herself. "Jason? My yoga instructor? He's just a friend, Donald. Why do you ask?" Donald nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then, with deliberate movements, he opened the folder and began laying out the evidence, piece by piece. "Just a friend," he repeated, his voice flat as he placed a photo of Lucille and Jason kissing in a hotel lobby on the table. "Is this how you greet all your friends?" Lucille's eyes widened, her mouth opening, and closing without sound. Donald continued, relentless. Or maybe this is normal friendly behavior. He slid over a printout of their text messages, intimate details that made him sick to read. Tell me, Lucille, do all your friends know what color underwear you prefer? Donald, I can explain. Lucille stammered, her composure crumbling. Can you? Donald's voice was ice. Can you explain the hotel charges on our credit card? The days you called in sick to work but were actually with him? The money you've been funneling to him? Tears were streaming down Lucille's face now. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. It didn't mean anything. Donald laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. A momentary lapse? Lucille, this has been going on for months. You've lied to me, to our daughter, to your colleagues. You've spent our money, neglected your responsibilities. Tell me, what part of that is momentary? Before Lucille could respond, they heard a gasp from the doorway. Both turned to see their daughter, Amber, standing there, her face a mask of shock and confusion. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Amber's voice quavered. Donald took a deep breath. Amber, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but your mother. Don't you dare. Amber interrupted, her shock morphing into anger. I already know about Mom's affair, and I can't believe you're being so cold about it. Donald felt like he'd been slapped. You knew? Amber's eyes flashed. Of course I knew. Mom's been happier these past few months than I've seen her in years. And now you're going to throw it all away over something as stupid as an affair. Amber, you don't understand, Donald began, but his daughter cut him off again. No, you don't understand. People make mistakes, Dad. But if you leave us over this, if you can't forgive Mom, then you're dead to me. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Donald looked from his furious daughter to his sobbing wife, feeling a chasm opening up beneath him. Without a word, he stood and walked out of the room. As he packed a bag in their bedroom, where Lucille had betrayed him countless times, he could hear Amber's voice drifting up from downstairs. Don't worry, Mom. He'll get over it. Your happiness matters too. Donald zipped up his bag, a cold, hard knot forming in his chest. As he walked out of the house, leaving behind the wreckage of his family, one thought crystallized in his mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal, a fitting backdrop to the coldness that had settled in Donald Gill's chest. He sat on the edge of the bed, his laptop open before him, the events of the past 48 hours playing on a loop in his mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, Amber's words, "You're dead to me," echoing like a cruel mantra. Donald rubbed his eyes, fatigue and emotional exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. But he couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when there was so much to be done. His phone buzzed, startling him out of his dark reverie. An unknown number. Donald hesitated for a moment before answering. Mr. Gill? A crisp, professional voice came through. This is Margaret Chun from Global Infrastructure Solutions. I hope I'm not disturbing you on a weekend. Donald straightened, his mind shifting gears. Not at all, Ms. Chun. What can I do for you? We've been following your work on the Richardson project, Mr. Gill. Impressive stuff. We have a major international infrastructure project coming up in Singapore, and we'd like to discuss your potential involvement. Donald's pulse quickened. Singapore, halfway around the world. A chance to put some distance between himself and the wreckage of his personal life. I'm very interested, Miss Chun. When would you like to meet? As he jotted down the details for a Monday morning video call, a plan began to form in Donald's mind. This wasn't just an escape. It was an opportunity. An opportunity for what? The word came to him unbidden. Revenge. The thought should have shocked him. Donald Gill, Boy Scout, upstanding citizen, contemplating revenge? But it didn't shock him. Instead, it sent a thrill of dark anticipation through his body. He opened a new browser tab and began researching. If he was going to do this, he needed information about Jason, about Lucille's finances, about divorce laws in their state. Hours passed, the room growing darker as the sun set outside his window. Donald barely noticed, his eyes fixed on the screen, absorbing every detail. It was well past midnight when he stumbled upon a forum post that made him sit up straight. A yoga student complaining about an instructor named Jason who had taken advantage of her, mentioning his gambling debts and connections to local loan sharks. Donald's lips curved into a mirthless smile. This was it, the leverage he needed, Jason's Achilles heel. He leaned back, his mind racing with possibilities. The Singapore project, Jason's gambling problem, Lucille's financial indiscretions. All the pieces were there, waiting to be arranged. Donald reached for his phone again, this time dialing a familiar number. Kenneth, it's Donald. I know it's late, but I need your advice on something. How familiar are you with international contract law? As he outlined his thoughts to his attorney friend, Donald felt a sense of purpose settling over him. This wasn't just about hurting Lucille and Jason. It was about reclaiming control, about ensuring that they felt every ounce of pain they had inflicted on him. By the time the sun rose, bathing the hotel room in a pale, watery light, Donald had the skeleton of a plan. He would accept the Singapore project. He would use the distance and the international complications to his advantage. And he would make sure that both Lucille and Jason learned the true meaning of consequences. Donald stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and walked to the window. The city was coming to life below, people starting their Sunday routines, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in room 412. He placed his palm against the cool glass, his reflection staring back at him with hard, determined eyes. "Be prepared," he muttered to himself, a twisted echo of his Boy Scout days. Oh, he'd be prepared all right, and they wouldn't know what hit them. The Singapore skyline glittered in the distance, a testament to human ambition and engineering prowess. Donald Gill stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his temporary office, but his mind was far from the architectural marvels before him. A month had passed since he'd left the wreckage of his personal life behind, a month of careful planning, of setting pieces into motion. Now, it was time for the next phase. Donald turned back to his desk, where his laptop displayed a series of complex financial reports. He'd hired a team of forensic accountants, ostensibly to review the project's finances. In reality, they were tracing every penny of his and Lucille's assets. His phone buzzed, a text from the lead accountant. "You need to see this." Donald's heart rate picked up as he opened the attached file. There it was, in black and white. Lucille had been siphoning money from their joint account. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. All transferred to an account under Jason McKinney's name. A cruel smile played at the corners of Donald's mouth. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was financial misconduct. In the eyes of the law, it could be seen as dissipation of marital assets. He carefully saved the evidence, adding it to his growing dossier. Next, he opened his email, an anonymous account he'd set up weeks ago. With methodical precision, he began composing messages to Jason's yoga clients. Not all of them, of course, just the married women, just enough to start the whispers, the rumors. Did you know your instructor has a history of pursuing married students? Are you aware of Jason McKinney's gambling debts? Send, send, send. Donald leaned back in his chair, imagining the chaos these little digital bombs would create. Jason's reputation would take a hit. His client base would dwindle. The financial pressure would mount. But he wasn't done yet. Donald picked up his burner phone, purchased with cash untraceable, and dialed a number he'd procured through less-than-legal means. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. "Is this Big Mike?" Donald asked, his voice steady. "Who's asking?" "Someone who thinks you might be interested in knowing about a new source of income for Jason McKinney. I hear he owes you quite a bit." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm listening." Donald smiled. The loan sharks would add another layer of pressure. Jason would find himself squeezed from all sides. With that task complete, Donald turned his attention to the shared investment portfolio he managed with Lucille. With a few careful trades, he could make it appear as though her decisions had led to significant losses. It wouldn't be enough to bankrupt them. He wasn't about to jeopardize his own financial future, but it would add to the mounting stress. As he executed the trades, Donald's mind wandered to Amber, his daughter. The betrayal still stung, her words echoing in his mind. But he couldn't bring himself to target her directly. Instead, he had secured her college fund in a separate account. Let Lucille and Jason's actions jeopardize their own futures, not Amber's. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Donald played his role perfectly. The dedicated engineer focused on the massive infrastructure project. But beneath the surface, his mind was constantly working, planning, refining his strategy. As night fell, Donald made one final move. He reached out to contacts in the art world, people he'd met through Lucille over the years. A casual comment here, a subtle insinuation there, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about Lucille's professional integrity. Exhausted but satisfied, Donald finally allowed himself to relax. He poured a glass of whiskey and returned to the window, gazing out at the glittering city. In the reflection, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back at him was harder, colder, a man capable of calculated revenge. Donald raised his glass in a mock toast to his reflection. To the unforgiving path, he murmured and drank deeply. 2 months into his plan, Donald found himself standing once again on the familiar doorstep of the house he once called home. The Singaporean sun had darkened his skin, and the weeks of calculated revenge had hardened his resolve. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, and rang the doorbell. Lucille opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Donald, I didn't know you were back in town." Donald forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Surprise," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Can I come in? I thought we could talk." Lucille hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. As Donald entered, he took in the subtle changes in the house. A new throw pillow on the couch, a different scent in the air, small things that spoke volumes about how life had continued in his absence. But it was Lucille herself that caught his attention. The confident, carefree woman he'd left behind 2 months ago was gone. In her place stood someone stressed and distracted, dark circles under her eyes and a constant furrow in her brow. They settled in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between them. "How's the project in Singapore?" Lucille finally asked, her voice strained with forced politeness. Donald launched into a detailed explanation of the infrastructure work, watching Lucille's eyes glaze over. He was mid-sentence when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face paling slightly before she hurriedly silenced it. "Everything okay?" Donald asked, feigning concern. Lucille nodded too quickly. "Yes, just work stuff. You know how it is." But Donald did know. He knew that Jason's yoga studio was hemorrhaging clients, that rumors were swirling about his inappropriate relationships with married students. He knew that loan sharks were circling, demanding repayment of gambling debts with escalating threats. "Speaking of work," Donald said carefully, "how are things at the gallery?" Lucille's facade cracked slightly. It's been challenging lately. Some issues with a few exhibitions, nothing major." Donald nodded sympathetically, even as he inwardly smiled. His subtle campaign to damage Lucille's professional reputation was bearing fruit. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You know, if you're having any financial troubles, I'd be happy to help. We could go over the accounts together, see where we stand." Lucille's eyes darted nervously around the room. That's very kind of you, Donald, but I'm sure it's just a temporary setback." Donald pressed on, relentless in his faux helpfulness. "Still, it might be good to meet with a financial advisor, just to be safe. I know a great one. Why don't I set up an appointment?" Trapped by his seeming generosity, Lucille could only nod in agreement. As if on cue, the front door opened and Amber walked in. She stopped short at the sight of her father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Donald stood, opening his arms. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm back in town for a bit. Thought I'd stop by." Amber hesitated for a moment before allowing a brief, stiff hug. "How long are you staying?" "Not sure yet," Donald replied. "Depends on how things go here." He turned back to Lucille. "I'll set up that meeting with a financial advisor. Maybe Amber should join us too. Always good to start learning about these things early." Amber's brow furrowed. "Financial advisor? What's going on?" Lucille jumped in quickly. "It's nothing, honey. Just some routine financial planning." But Donald could see the seed of doubt planted in Amber's mind. Good. Let her start to question, to worry. As he left the house that evening, Donald felt satisfaction. The pressure was mounting, cracks appearing in the facade Lucille had built, and he was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, Donald's plan continued to unfold. The meeting with the financial advisor, secretly arranged by Kenneth, painted a picture of their financial future. Donald watched as both Lucille and Amber grew increasingly anxious, the weight of potential financial ruin settling on their shoulders. During his visits, ostensibly attempts at reconciliation, Donald gathered more evidence. A carelessly discarded receipt here, an overheard phone conversation there, each piece carefully documented, building an ironclad case for the divorce proceedings to come. One evening, as Donald was preparing to leave after another tense family dinner, he overheard Amber confronting Lucille in the kitchen. "Mom, what's really going on? Are we in trouble? Is this because of Jason?" Donald paused by the door, listening intently. "It's complicated, sweetie." Lucille's voice was strained. "But I promise, I'm handling it." "Are you?" Amber's voice cracked slightly. "Because it doesn't seem like you're handling anything. Dad's back. We're meeting with financial advisors, and you look like you haven't slept in weeks." "What aren't you telling me?" Donald slipped out before he could hear Lucille's response, a cold smile playing on his lips. The doubts were growing, the pressure increasing. Soon, very soon, it would all come crashing down. As he drove back to his hotel, Donald reflected on the past 2 months. The careful manipulation, the strategic moves, the slow but steady erosion of Lucille and Jason's lives. It should have made him feel guilty, this calculated destruction. But all he felt was satisfaction. They had destroyed his life, shattered his trust, broken his family. Now, they would reap what they had sown. The unforgiving path of revenge stretched out before him, and Donald Gill was committed to seeing it through to the bitter end. Donald Gill stood in the kitchen of what was once his family home, a manila envelope clutched in his hand. The weight of its contents, divorce papers meticulously prepared by Kenneth, felt heavier than it should. He glanced at his watch. Lucille would be home soon. As if on cue, he heard the jangle of keys in the lock. Donald straightened, his face a mask of calm determination. The time for pretense was over. Lucille bustled in, arms full of groceries. She stopped short at the sight of Donald, her eyes darting nervously to the envelope in his hand. "Donald, what's going on?" He didn't answer immediately, instead watching as she set down the bags, her movements betraying her unease. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, devoid of emotion. "Sit down, Lucille. We need to talk." She complied, sinking into a kitchen chair, her face pale. Donald remained standing, towering over her. "I think you know what this is," he said, placing the envelope on the table between them. Lucille's hand trembled as she reached for it. "Divorce papers," she whispered, not a question but a defeated statement. Donald nodded. "Along with a comprehensive record of your affair and financial misdeeds. Every text, every hotel receipt, every penny you've siphoned from our accounts to fund Jason's gambling habit." The color drained from Lucille's face. "How did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Donald's voice was cold. "I'm a civil engineer, Lucille. I build things for a living. Did you think I couldn't deconstruct your web of lies?" Tears welled up in Lucille's eyes. "Donald, please. I thought we were working on our marriage. We can work through this." For a moment, Donald felt a flicker of the love he once had for this woman, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her betrayal, of Amber's cruel words. There's nothing to work through, Lucille. Your actions and Amber's response have shown me the truth about our family. This marriage is over. As if summoned by her name, Amber chose that moment to walk into the kitchen. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. Mom? Dad? What's happening? Donald turned to his daughter, his expression hardening. Your mother and I are getting a divorce. I'm sure this comes as no surprise to you, given your previous insight into the situation. Amber's face flushed with anger. You can't be serious. Mom made a mistake, Dad. People deserve second chances. A mistake? Donald's laugh was harsh. Let me show you what your mother's mistake has cost us. He pulled out a series of financial documents from the envelope, spreading them across the table. Your mother has been funneling money to Jason for months. Money from our joint accounts. Money earmarked for your education. Amber's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. Mom, is this true? Lucille's sob was answer enough. Amber stumbled back, her righteous anger deflating as the reality of the situation sank in. Donald watched the doubt creep into his daughter's eyes, feeling satisfaction. I'll be moving out. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the division of assets and custody arrangements. As he turned to leave, Lucille's voice, small and broken, stopped him. Donald, please. I love you. We can fix this. He paused at the doorway, not turning back. Love, you don't even know the meaning of the word. With that, he walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of his family. As he got into his car, he could hear Amber's raised voice through the open kitchen window. How could you, Mom? How could you do this to us? Donald allowed himself a small, cold smile as he drove away. The unraveling had begun. Donald sat in the austere conference room of Global Infrastructure Solutions, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the polished mahogany table. The Singapore project, once his ticket to freedom and revenge, now threatened to become his downfall. Mr. Gill, the company's internal investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chun, began. We've received some troubling information regarding the procurement of the Singapore contract. Allegations of bribery have been made. Donald's mind raced. Bribery? He'd done nothing of the sort. Every aspect of the deal had been above board, meticulously documented. That's absurd, he replied, keeping his voice level. I can assure you, every step of the negotiation process was in full compliance with both local and international law. Sarah's expression remained impassive. I'm sure you understand that we need to conduct a thorough investigation. In the meantime, you'll be placed on administrative leave. As Donald left the office, his phone buzzed. A text from Kenneth. Lucille's lawyer called. She's using the bribery allegations in the divorce proceedings. Says it proves you're untrustworthy. Call me ASAP. Donald's hand tightened around the phone. Of course Lucille would use this against him. She was fighting dirty now, desperate to salvage what she could from the wreckage of their marriage. Over the next few weeks, Donald's life became a whirlwind of legal meetings and late-night strategy sessions. With Kenneth's help, he worked tirelessly to clear his name, all while keeping the divorce proceedings on track. We need to find out where these allegations came from, Kenneth said one evening, his tie loosened, empty coffee cups littering the desk between them. This isn't just about the divorce anymore, Don. Your whole career is at stake. Donald nodded. I've been going over every interaction, every email related to the Singapore project. There's got to be something we're missing. As they pored over documents late into the night, a pattern began to emerge. Subtle discrepancies in communication timestamps, inconsistencies in email metadata. Kenneth, Donald said slowly, a spark of realization in his eyes. I think I know what's going on. This isn't just a baseless accusation. Someone's actively trying to frame me. Kenneth leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. Look at these emails. Donald spread out a series of printouts. The headers don't match up. Someone's been intercepting and altering our communications. But who would have the resources and motivation to do something like this? The answer hit them both at the same time: a rival company. With this new lead, Donald and Kenneth redoubled their efforts. They hired cybersecurity experts to trace the altered communications, followed paper trails that led to shell companies and offshore accounts. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings loomed. Lucille, emboldened by the bribery allegations, pushed for a larger settlement. After all, her lawyer argued in one particularly heated meeting, Mrs. Gill needs protection given the likelihood of Mr. Gill's imminent unemployment and potential criminal charges. Donald gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain calm. He knew the truth would come out. It had to. As the investigation progressed, Donald found himself working around the clock. By day, he gathered evidence to clear his name in the bribery case. By night, he refined his strategy for the divorce proceedings. Sleep became a luxury he could ill afford. It was during one of these late-night sessions, as Donald combed through yet another batch of financial records, that he stumbled upon the crucial piece of evidence: a series of transactions, carefully hidden, that linked a rival construction firm to the shell companies behind the altered communications. "Got you," Donald whispered, a fierce grin spreading across his face. He immediately called Kenneth. "We've got them," he said as soon as his friend picked up. "I can prove the bribery allegations were a setup, but we need to move fast." Kenneth's voice was alert despite the late hour. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there." As they prepared to present their findings to Global Infrastructure Solutions and the authorities, Donald allowed himself a moment of reflection. The past few months had been a crucible, testing him in ways he never imagined. But he'd emerged stronger, more determined than ever. Lucille, Jason, the rivals who tried to frame him, they had all underestimated Donald Gill. They were about to learn the cost of that mistake. The boardroom of Global Infrastructure Solutions was silent as Donald finished presenting his evidence. The faces around the table ranged from shocked to impressed, with more than a few guilty looks from those who had been quick to believe the bribery allegations. Sarah Chun, the internal investigator who had initially confronted Donald, was the first to speak. "Mr. Gill, we owe you an apology. The thoroughness of your investigation is remarkable." Donald nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "I understand you were doing your job, Miss Chun. I'm just glad we were able to uncover the truth." The CEO, a gruff man named Harrison Wells, cleared his throat. "Donald, I won't mince words. You've not only cleared your name, but uncovered a plot that could have cost this company millions. Your integrity and dedication are, well, they're exactly what we need in a leader." Donald's eyebrows rose. "Sir, we'll be announcing a restructuring next week. I'd like you to consider taking on a more senior role. VP of International Projects, perhaps?" As the meeting adjourned, Donald felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His professional reputation wasn't just intact. It had been enhanced. The future, which had seemed so uncertain just days ago, now held new promise. But there was still one more battle to fight. The divorce proceedings, which had dragged on for months, came to a swift conclusion in light of the new developments. Lucille, her leverage evaporated with the dismissal of the bribery allegations, was left with little to negotiate. In the end, she received minimal alimony, her infidelity and financial misconduct working against her. The judge was particularly unimpressed by her attempts to use the false bribery accusations to gain an advantage. As they left the courthouse for the last time, Donald saw Jason waiting by a beat-up car in the parking lot. The once confident yoga instructor looked haggard, the strain of the past months evident in his posture. Lucille paused, looking between Donald and Jason, indecision clear on her face. Donald merely nodded to her and walked away. He had no more words for either of them. Later that evening, as Donald was packing up the last of his things from the family home, Amber appeared in the doorway of his old office. "Dad!" Her voice was small, hesitant. "Can we talk?" Donald turned, regarding his daughter coolly. "What is it, Amber?" She stepped into the room, wringing her hands. I'm sorry. For everything. for not believing you, for defending Mom. I was wrong. For a moment, Donald felt a flicker of his old affection for his daughter, but the memory of her cruel words, "You're dead to me," still stung. "I appreciate your apology, Amber, but it doesn't change what happened." Amber's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I miss you, Dad. Can't we try to fix this?" Donald sighed, feeling suddenly very tired. Some things, once broken, can't be easily fixed. "I'll always be your father, Amber, but our relationship, it needs time." He turned back to his packing, effectively ending the conversation. He heard Amber's quiet sobs as she left the room, but he hardened his heart against them. Trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt. The next day, Donald moved into his new home, a sleek, modern apartment that bore no resemblance to the suburban house he'd shared with Lucille. As he stood on the balcony, looking out over the city, he felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. The path of revenge had been long and bitter. He'd lost his marriage, strained his relationship with his daughter, and nearly lost his career. But he'd also rediscovered his strength, his resilience, and his self-respect. Donald Gill raised a glass to the setting sun, a solitary toast to new beginnings. The unforgiving path had led him here, to this moment of hard-won peace. Whatever came next, he would face it on his own terms. 6 years passed, each day putting more distance between Donald and the turmoil of his past. His career flourished, the promotion to VP of International Projects leading to even greater opportunities. He traveled the world, leaving his mark on skylines from Dubai to Shanghai. But success, he found, was a poor substitute for family. The holidays were the hardest, his apartment feeling cavernous and empty without the warmth of loved ones. It was on a crisp autumn evening, as Donald was reviewing plans for a new project in Brazil, that the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But something, intuition perhaps, or just simple curiosity, propelled him to the door. He opened it to find Amber standing there, looking both familiar and strange. At 25, she was no longer the defiant teenager he remembered, but a young woman with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice catching slightly. I need your help." Donald's hand tightened on the doorframe, his expression carefully neutral. "What kind of help, Amber?" She took a deep breath. "I want to go to grad school, but I can't afford it. I was hoping maybe you could help with the tuition." For a long moment, Donald said nothing. He simply looked at his daughter, memories of betrayal warring with the lingering embers of paternal love. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Wait here." He retreated into his apartment, leaving Amber shifting nervously in the hallway. When he returned, he was holding a sealed envelope. "I think," Donald said slowly, "that you should ask your real father for the money." Amber's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? You are my real father." Donald held out the envelope. "Open it." With trembling hands, Amber tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents. Her eyes widened as she scanned the document. A DNA test result. This can't be right," she whispered, her face pale. "I had suspicions for years," Donald said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your mother's affair with Jason started earlier than I initially thought. I got the test done after the divorce, but I never found the right moment to tell you. Or perhaps I just didn't want to hurt you further." Amber looked up from the paper, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please. This doesn't change anything. You raised me. You're my father in every way that matters." Donald shook his head slowly. "No, Amber. This changes everything. It explains why you were so quick to defend your mother, why you turned on me so easily. Blood will out, as they say." "Dad, no. Please." Amber reached out, but Donald was already stepping back, his hand on the door. "You're nothing to me," he said, the words falling like hammer blows. "Go ask Jason for the money. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to know he has a daughter." With that, Donald closed the door, shutting out Amber's anguished cries. He leaned against it, feeling a complex mix of emotions: vindication, sorrow, and a grim sense of finality. His revenge was complete. He had lost both his unfaithful wife and the daughter who had betrayed him. But in that loss, he found a strange sort of freedom. The last ties to his old life were severed. Whatever came next, it would be entirely on his terms. Donald walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawled before him. The unforgiving path had led him here, to this moment of stark, solitary triumph. He had survived. He had prevailed. And in the end, that would have to be enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
My spouse and I are employed at the same marketing firm. Lucy holds the title of customer ambassador, though the specifics of her role remain elusive. I'm Mark, leading the IT team. Things were going smoothly. We were both employed, and Happy had just finished renovating our rundown house. We have 2 lovely children, Emma, 13, and Daniel, 11. We live near our families and have close friendships. Both over 30, we complement each other well, though she surpasses me in looks, standing at 1.75 meters with long blonde hair and captivating blue eyes. Lucy claims her family resides in Sweden, and she embodies a slim Scandinavian appearance. Energetic and vibrant, she never seems to stand still. I stand at 7.5 centimeters tall with sandy hair and prefer endurance sports like cycling and running, resulting in a slim, physically fit physique, albeit not overtly athletic. I was taken aback when invited to a long weekend on a private island owned by one of our firm's clients. Our CEO, Jack Edwards, explained that he, along with his wife Margaret, several directors, and their partners would attend. Lucy was also invited due to her role as the client's main contact. It seemed I was there for number crunching, but hey, don't question a good opportunity. Jack emphasized the client's wealth and potential significance to our firm, mentioning an early Friday departure and Monday return on a private charter with all expenses covered. Lucy seemed well informed, having worked closely with the client for months and eagerly anticipating the free weekend. Although I inquired about the plans, she didn't have much information, so I asked about the client. Lucy explained that his name was William Fellows, in his mid-40s, exuding confidence and inheriting a family fortune. She seemed somewhat fascinated, describing him as assertive and reserved. Great, I thought to myself, he sounds like an arrogant idiot. But I decided to keep that observation to myself until the weekend. 2 weeks later, on a Friday morning, we found ourselves aboard a private charter plane. I must admit I was impressed. If the island belonged to him, it must be quite luxurious. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it appeared vast, perhaps 5 miles long and a couple of miles wide. As we approached for landing, it resembled a 5-star resort, with main buildings positioned behind a crescent-shaped white sandy beach. Lucy was thrilled, and the others shared her excitement. After settling into our rooms, we joined our host for lunch on the veranda overlooking the bay. Though I was initially wary, William seemed affable, and Lucy even downplayed his appearance, comparing him to George Clooney. He thanked us for coming and encouraged us to relax. We conversed with other couples from our firm and met a striking brunette named Charlotte, whom I assumed was William's companion for the weekend. Apart from the waitstaff, there was a man who appeared to be a security guard, lingering in the background. I wondered what threats William faced, requiring protection even on a secluded island. William greeted Lucy warmly, and they seemed at ease in each other's company. She, along with the others, appeared to heed his words, likely due to his generosity as a host and his importance as our firm's most valuable client. We had an excellent afternoon snorkeling, kayaking, and simply lounging around in the bay. Refreshments and food were readily available. Later, we all gathered for dinner with the group, enjoying a laid-back and amiable atmosphere as we engaged in conversations in small groups. Charlotte approached us, introducing herself warmly and sharing anecdotes about her upbringing in England. Despite giving the impression of coming from a well-off family, she seemed genuinely pleasant. I pondered whether she was a model or perhaps didn't have a need to work. To my surprise, she displayed flirtatious behavior toward me, even in Lucy's presence. I skillfully evaded her advances, attributing it to her overly friendly nature. With no childcare responsibilities and the serene setting, it was an ideal setup for a romantic evening. Lucy was especially affectionate, and our lovemaking was passionate. She professed her love for me repeatedly, making it one of the most memorable nights in a while. Perhaps there was merit to the notion of a love island after all. I hoped for a repeat the following morning, but Lucy promptly got ready for breakfast, prompting me to finally get out of bed and join her. As she conversed with Jack and William, I wondered if work matters were on their minds, given their slightly tense demeanor. Maybe William was exploiting the weekend to discuss work-related issues. Approaching them, the conversation appeared to falter briefly, and after a quick snack, we and the others continued to enjoy another delightful day by the pool. On Saturday, we ventured out for dinner, and I couldn't help but notice Lucy's enhanced attire. She looked stunning in a red satin evening dress and high heels. Following dinner, William requested a few minutes of our time. We agreed and followed him into the office, accompanied by a security guard. William took a seat in a plush leather chair while I settled onto the sofa opposite Lucy, observing her slight distance from me. After a prolonged pause, William mentioned that he had a proposition for Mark, stating it was of a personal nature. Mark responded affirmatively, maintaining composure despite feeling completely astonished. William elaborated, expressing his enjoyment of working with Lucy and the bond they had developed over the past few months. He hinted at a proposal, expressing his desire to spend the remainder of the weekend with Lucy. He offered compensation for her time away from me, proposing to transfer $100,000 into our joint account. I chuckled, assuming it was a jest, and couldn't resist making a quip about his generosity compared to a famous movie offer. However, the room fell silent, with no one joining in the laughter. William continued, "Just like in any other business, I'm open to negotiating the price to get what I desire. Plus, Charlotte will be in a tough spot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd agree to entertain her." I glanced at Lucy, anticipating a smile, but instead she looked concerned. "This isn't a joke, Mark," she said firmly. "William invited me to join him, and I think we should seriously consider this offer." I felt the urge to lash out, but before I could react, the guard was already near. I was taken aback by how swiftly he moved. William pressed on, saying, "I assure you, your wife fully supports this idea. What damage could come from it? We'll all have a great time, and you'll earn a substantial sum of money." Turning to Lucy, I remarked, "Perhaps the difference in price is because Demi Moore didn't settle for that amount." Lucy winced at my comment, but wisely chose to remain silent. My mind raced as I struggled to think clearly, my breathing growing labored. I glanced at the guard, whose demeanor had shifted entirely. He appeared wary, focusing intently on my movements, and with good reason, given my strong desire to strike William. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice strained. "Ex-military, judging by your demeanor. You must deal with this sort of thing often." "Shane, sir," he replied calmly. "I can't comment on this matter, and if you were to attack your boss, I reckon I could handle you." Shane flashed a smile. "Perhaps just to prevent you from doing so, sir." Turning back to William, I retorted, "It's fortunate you brought him along. Otherwise, I might have knocked you senseless." William remained unfazed. "Let's not rush, Mark. Much depends on this." Lucy interjected, urging me to consider. "Think about it, Mark. Just a few days, and money could change our lives forever." I was devastated. It was evident that Lucy was on board and even instigated this plan. "Tell me, dear," I pressed, "did the offer of money sway you to agree to this?" With no response from Lucy, I continued, "I suspect Charlotte was offered as an added incentive. Who is she? A fancy woman?" William responded, "Charlotte is a close personal friend of mine. In addition to her wealth, she's an elite escort who only takes contracts that pique her interest. Rest assured, you'll have an extraordinary experience with her." Lucy winced again, but offered no defense. "Well, William," I retorted, "you can take your money and shove it up your perfumed rear end." At that moment, Lucy spoke up, revealing her true intentions. She explained to me that it was her decision, and emphasized that it was merely about physical lovemaking. She mentioned that both she and William were curious about exploring it with others, assuring me that their connection was limited to mutual liking and wouldn't diminish our love for each other. Lucy expressed confidence that both Charlotte and I would enjoy the experience. Stunned by her words, I gradually understood the gravity of the situation. I expressed to my dear wife that my desire for exclusivity was profound and meant more than she might realize. I accused her of betrayal and conspiracy behind my back, declaring that I could never trust her again if she was willing to engage in such behavior once. Lucy quickly responded, claiming that I was overreacting. She asserted that she had informed me about her intentions and insisted on her honesty. She mentioned that the affair would occur, but assured me of her return, promising full devotion afterward. Lucy appealed to my love for her, urging me to permit her this one indulgence. She pointed out potential benefits such as financial gain, vacations, and family experiences. Lucy warned against using our children as an excuse and rejected the idea that money motivated her, accusing me of harboring a desire for the affair. She concluded by suggesting that my honesty would only matter if we reached agreements together, implying that I was aligned with William, whom she disparaged as an arrogant idiot. Lucy continued, stating that she believed the mention of money and Charlotte was only because she hadn't expected me to agree. She admitted that she still didn't agree, even with the offer of money. She confessed that she wanted to experience something different and was drawn to William, but she believed it shouldn't injure our relationship. I expressed my reluctance to change and questioned whether she believed this course of action was superior. I inquired if she had already made her decision, even going as far as dressing for the occasion. She warned me not to resist, indicating that I wouldn't appreciate the consequences. Confused, I asked for clarification on what she meant. She replied, suggesting that I wouldn't benefit from fighting against her wishes or seeking a divorce, as it would result in losing everything. She warned me that my home, children, and even my job would be endangered if I resisted, implying that accepting the situation would make everything easier. She mentioned seeing me the next day and assured me of her love and exclusivity. Feeling suffocated, I knew I had to leave before losing control. Struggling to breathe, I stood up and made my way to the door. Despite Lucy calling my name, I continued moving. In the hallway, Charlotte approached and embraced me, offering reassurance. I turned to her, acknowledging her presence. "Who are you, a damn consolation prize?" She walked away confidently. I continued walking and eventually reached outside, but I didn't feel well. I heard footsteps behind me and was disappointed to see it was Shane, not Lucy. "Listen, Shane, you just need to leave me alone." "I'd love to, but I need to ensure you don't do anything rash. Do you have any thoughts?" "Because I'm out of ideas." "Mark, you don't look too good. Just sit against the wall, pull your knees up, and focus on taking long, slow breaths." Feeling weak, I lacked the strength to argue. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few minutes before I calmed down. I noticed Shane sitting beside me. "Thanks. I might have had an anxiety or panic attack. You looked pretty pale, but now you seem better." "So, Shane, any ideas on how to get out of this mess?" Shane replied, "Honestly, you can't leave the island today. There are no boats, and the plane and pilot left for another charter. You could try radioing for help, but a cheating wife isn't exactly an emergency." "I'm relieved you see her as unfaithful. She doesn't seem to grasp it, and I'm starting to doubt myself. What should I do? I can't even confront him now because of you." "Yes, sorry about that. I'd step aside, but it'd ruin my career." After a pause, Shane suggested, "Think about your next move and come up with a plan. Whatever you decide can wait until Monday. It's like in the army. Strategize. Keep quiet about your intentions." The problem is I'm clueless about what to do. They seem to have everything figured out, and I'll just have to endure tomorrow and Monday while you babysit me. After a pause, Shane continued, "There's a cargo ship arriving early Monday. You could hitch a ride if you want to avoid the plane. With everyone else leaving, they can't stop you. No one wants to be accused of kidnapping. I can even accompany you. This deal is losing its appeal. I don't like being on the wrong side, even if it's well-paying." "Okay, that's helpful. I just need to get through tomorrow. How about we go hiking around the island tomorrow morning to distract you, and think about Charlotte. She seems nice, and you've got nothing to lose. If you don't want to go back, you can crash in one of the booths tonight." "No, I think our room is empty. I'll head back there. Maybe she'll change her mind." Of course she didn't. Surprisingly, I fell asleep, probably from exhaustion. The next morning, I changed into my workout clothes and hurried downstairs, hoping to avoid everyone and go on my hike with Shane. Unfortunately, the dining room fell silent as soon as I entered. I quickly grabbed some fruit and heard murmurs of reassurance that everything would be fine. Then CFO John Cousins approached with his wife. "Look, Mark, we've all been through this. Just go with it. It's not personal. He dallies with other wives, then moves on, and he's very generous." When he uttered those words, I noticed his wife's neck flush red. In that moment, Lucy and William emerged. She appeared utterly pleased with herself, radiant, I'd say, until she caught sight of me. Her smile faded. She released that idiot's hand and approached me, intending to kiss or hug. I held her at arm's length and surveyed the room. God, I thought, what a damn idiot. Everyone knew what would happen before the weekend even started. What an absolute fool I was. I stepped out. Lucy implored, "Please stay, Mark. Let's chat with the group and have another good day together." Scanning the room again, I found all eyes fixed on me, some anticipating, others amused by the scene. No, he paid for you and can keep you. But before I go, I need to address the group. I believe this weekend has been planned for some time, and you all have been in on it, so it's only fair that you hear me out. All members of the group exchanged shocked looks, nervously glancing at each other. Jack and Margaret, I wouldn't have come this weekend if it weren't for you. I never imagined you'd be involved in something so vile. You know and condone what he does, like some sick voyeur fan club. I hope you enjoyed keeping me in the dark. I noticed their awkward movements. This clearly wasn't part of their plan. I thought we were friends, and their efforts to make me feel at home so they could orchestrate everything was a nice touch. And Bill, you're wrong. This is deeply personal. So thanks for your role in wrecking my marriage. The fact that they're willing to leverage my children is frankly disgusting. I won't let anyone threaten my kids. Lucy interjected. You're overreacting. It was just closeness, a one-time adventure. I told you I love... I interrupted her, commenting on what I perceived as the initial phase of her defense strategy. I mentioned that I was aware she had planned my reaction, referring to her as Captain Ducker, and expressed curiosity about her intentions. I outlined Phase A as remaining in the current situation and being compelled to accept what had happened while trying to normalize everything. I mentioned the belief that I shouldn't overreact, be rude, or act childish, and acknowledged the need for personal growth, attributing any resistance to my ego. Despite knowing it wouldn't succeed, I described this as part of the process to soften my stance. Moving on to Phase B, I proposed that after the weekend I would take charge. I suggested increasing physical lovemaking, perhaps trying something new, and leveraging our connection to improve our relationship. I hinted that she may have discussed seducing me, and affectionately urged her not to let my feelings of loss linger for too long. I described Lucy's nervous glance at William, indicating that my comment had affected her deeply. She mentioned the money he had offered and suggested using my earnings from prostitution to take the children to Disneyland, causing discomfort among some present. She outlined a potential Phase B if our conflict persisted, referring to a seed planted the previous night, suggesting that allowing her desires was a test of my love. She acknowledged my 15 years of devotion and emphasized that this was just one night for me. She admitted that it might weaken her resolve, but questioned what she would gain after 15 years of devotion if treated poorly. She expressed doubt about the effectiveness of the plan and suggested I give her time to cool down. She predicted that in about a week or two, I would likely be found drowning my sorrows at a bar, followed by her seeking forgiveness, which she referred to as Phase D. She questioned whether I truly regretted my actions and realized the depth of the hurt caused. She speculated that I wouldn't have pursued it if aware of the pain it would cause. She suggested I would profess love, beg, and cry, but expressed doubt about the effectiveness of this approach due to my public displays of affection with William. She concluded by stating that Phase D wouldn't work and hinted at the necessity of a backup plan. She referred to Phase D as threats, suggesting that she would take all the money, the house, and turn the children against me. She hinted at the possibility of losing my job and speculated about William providing top-notch lawyers for her. She described potential consequences of me ending up sad, broke, and alone, even suggesting the threat of moving in with him and living happily ever after with our kids. This last statement prompted a reaction from William, indicating his reluctance to such an idea. Lucy finally found her voice. "It's not such a big problem," she began. "Why don't we just relax and give ourselves time to think?" "This is Phase A, Lucy. We've been through this," I said firmly. "So, why don't we save everyone time and move on to the end result?" That's what I pondered last night, and my conclusion is that everyone, including the kids, would be better off if we divorced. It's much healthier than living in an unhappy home. In the end, it was clear that neither of us could find happiness in the midst of this turmoil. I asserted that despite any attempts to prevent me from seeing my children, I knew I was a good father, and ultimately, that's what mattered. I expressed doubts about receiving support from her family and friends once they learned of her actions. Money was never my priority. It had always been about her. There was a moment of stunned silence among everyone present as I questioned if anyone had more tricks up their sleeves or if I had missed anything. When there was no response, I addressed Jack, stating that he could keep his job, but I would see him in court for wrongful termination, as my job depended on having my wife as a client, which seemed to be the underlying reason for the situation. With that, I left, and the room fell silent. Shane followed me as usual. As we exited, Shane chuckled. Well played. Looks like you took to heart the advice of keeping the plan to yourself. I couldn't help but smile. Yeah, seems I botched that idea. Shane actually laughed as we left the building. Good thing you stuck to civilian life. You'd never have cut it in the army anyway. Let's go. Shane grabbed his backpack and set off at a leisurely pace up the coast. After a mile, I struggled to keep up and began to wonder if it was a mistake. I heard him shout something from ahead about how physical exertion is a great way to distract from mental anguish. My burning muscles and lungs seemed to agree. The scenery was awe-inspiring, and Shane proved to be excellent company. He transitioned from inquiring about me to sharing amusing anecdotes from his days in the British Army. We spent hours exploring the island's northern region, tracing the coastline and ascending to a central peak. When Shane proposed jogging downhill for our return, I struggled to keep pace, suspecting he slowed down either to assist or tease me, depending on one's perspective. By noon, we were back, and while I was gasping for breath, Shane, a former physical education instructor, assured me of my decent fitness level. Feeling drained, I made my way to my room, finding Lucy absent, which led me to wonder if she was earning extra money. After a refreshing shower, hunger drove me to the dining room in search of sustenance, only to be disappointed yet again by the presence of William and Lucy. Shane lingered in the background, looking remarkably fresh and dapper in a suit. William, in his usual confident manner, began to address me. Mark, my dear friend, I believe we started off on the wrong foot, and I want to extend my apologies. I've never encountered issues like this in my past relationships, and I certainly didn't intend to jeopardize your marriage. It's too late, I replied bluntly. You've completed the deed. I wish to retract my request to spend tonight with your wife and increase the compensation. With these words, William handed me a document. I opened it and found a check for $250,000. I glanced at Lucy, who seemed to be crying, and I couldn't resist commenting. You must have been quite skilled to earn that much, darling. Lucy's eyes sparked with anger. That's beside the point. We made a dreadful mistake, and we're trying to fix it. William acted like a gentleman and genuinely cared about your reaction. I chuckled at this notion. What's your notion of an ideal gentleman? Did he express gratitude after lovemaking? There's no need for jesting, Mark. This was simply a misjudgment on our part. We misjudged your response. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for both of us. You should appreciate Lucy's sacrifice to offer you and your children a better life. I questioned whether their actions were simply a misjudgment, expressing my clear opposition to their plan, which they disregarded. I pointed out that they could have stopped at any moment, but chose to continue until satisfying themselves. I tore up the check, sparing them from disgrace, but emphasized that the betrayal remained, doubting it could be repaired this time. Lucy began crying as I addressed them, questioning their motives, whether it was about control or the thrill of pursuing another man's wife, and criticizing their behavior as pathetic. I highlighted William's age and compared his actions to that of a child taking toys just because he could, suggesting that he should be engaging in more meaningful pursuits. In response, William laughed, stating his oversight of an international corporation and his charitable donations. He criticized my management of the corporation and questioned my involvement in charity work, implying that I was too self-absorbed and preoccupied with manipulating lives to genuinely help others. He suggested that I derived pleasure from humiliating others, as evidenced by the way I planned the weekend. I informed Lucy that William's interest in her wasn't solely exclusive, as he was involved with every board member's wife, so she was just one among many. I then addressed William directly, urging him to mature and seek genuine relationships, suggesting that he use his wealth for good and change his unpleasant demeanor. This seemed to cause him to falter in his speech and appear uncertain for the first time. I then instructed Shane to remove the objectionable matter from my sight before I took action. I noticed Shane conceal a slight smile before addressing Fellowes. I believe it's time for us to depart, sir, before your safety becomes a concern. After their departure, I grabbed a snack and headed to the beach, seeking to avoid the others. Just when I thought I was alone, I spotted Charlotte reclining in a hammock, engrossed in reading. If she was beautiful before, her smile now made her truly radiant. I approached her. Apologies for last night. Before I could say more, she responded, No need for apologies. I was certain you'd accept the offer. If I had known, I wouldn't have approached you. Your reaction is completely understandable, and your speech at breakfast was exceptional.
I couldn't agree more. When you left, Lucy broke into tears, and I've never seen William appear so embarrassed. I relished every moment. "Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that, considering your circumstances," I replied. "Thank you. It's appreciated. I'm relieved things are becoming clearer. I'm tired of being told this is nonsense. You see, William is clueless about how to handle you. He's never faced rejection before and isn't accustomed to ethical dilemmas. Has he already offered you more money?"
Yes, just before I came down. $250,000. What a fool. I advised him against it, but he's accustomed to paying his way until he gets what he desires. He'll face consequences for this, both professionally and personally. Charlotte was receptive and listened attentively as I discussed my marriage and children. Clearly intelligent and well-educated, she expressed surprise at Lucy's actions, given our seemingly content marriage, suggesting there might have been some discontent or an open arrangement between us. I pondered it. No, it's merely an unexpected betrayal. She seems entirely captivated by this man. He has a certain allure for women. It's charming, but the depth isn't substantial if you catch my drift. We conversed further, and I felt somewhat relieved. You truly care for her. Your response to the proposals and at breakfast must be devastating. I shrugged. I regret my involvement in this. It's not your fault. I just need to endure one more night, then perhaps I can escape. She smiled again, becoming a pleasant distraction. Well, perhaps I can assist with this. Dinner surprised everyone when I joined. Lucy wasn't seated next to William anymore. Dinner proceeded normally, though I brushed off Lucy's attempts at conversation. When Lucy suggested going to bed early, I politely declined, citing other plans. She looked embarrassed, which heightened when Charlotte hugged me as I rose from the table. We left together, walking down to the cabins on the beach. Initially, the plan was just to depart together and give Lucy a taste of her own medicine. But holding Charlotte felt right, really right. And when we kissed, some of the disappointment from the past 24 hours faded away. I wrestled with maintaining my morals, my sense of right and wrong. Then I glanced at her. I suppose Lucy wanted me to be more adaptable. And as far as I'm concerned, Lucy has already broken our marriage vows. I had an exceptional night with Charlotte. It wasn't merely her physical beauty, she exuded a serene allure. Every gesture seemed calculated and flawlessly executed. She truly mastered her allure. Surprisingly, thoughts of Lucy didn't cross my mind, nor did I feel guilty. The painful image of Lucy with William erased any hint of remorse. I enjoyed myself. After a boat taxi to the airport and the usual flight home, I collected the kids and arranged their weekend as best I could. I fabricated a vague story about a disagreement between their mother and me, but suggested we have dinner together. As Lucy entered the house, hauling our heavy suitcase, the children dashed upstairs shouting, "Hi, Mom!" Lucy smiled. "Dinner sounds good. Give me a few minutes to freshen up." "I'd prefer if you didn't, Lucy. Like you said, I'm uncertain how much time I'll have with them. So I'd rather we go alone, Lucy."
Upon meeting William, I felt an immediate connection. He exuded charm, confidence, and strength, reminiscent of old movie characters. It was odd that later, in Mark's presence, he seemed different. Flirting led to lunch, then dinner. It was exhilarating, dizzying even. After dinner, his goodnight kiss nearly melted me, but I was resolute not to cheat and informed him as such. William mentioned his past open relationships, making me wonder if Mark might be open to it. When he proposed the idea, I thought the money would justify it. Jack supported me, and we began planning for the weekend. The weekend started off wonderfully. I had a fantastic time with Mark and nearly abandoned the entire plan. If only I could. William assured me everything would be fine and advised Mark to relax. Both he and Jack anticipated Mark rejecting the idea, but suggested giving him time to calm down. Mark's reaction was completely unexpected and upended our plans. The most surprising thing was his apparent illness. Although I wanted to chase after him, William reassured me that everything would be okay. He arranged to meet Ed Charlotte, so when he didn't return, I assumed he stayed with her. I felt relieved. After waiting for months, I eagerly anticipated spending time with William. The moment he kissed me, I knew I would succeed. He led me to his bedroom, and even before I could undress, I was already filled with anticipation. William stood before me and undressed me delicately, treating me like a prized possession. I felt incredibly special. Despite his age, he was remarkably fit, and I wasn't disappointed by his physique or his masculinity. When I reached out to him, William pulled back and began kissing my entire body, exploring every inch. Gradually, he assessed my reactions and responded, seemingly understanding my desires perfectly. My first climax came quickly, thanks to his skillful touch. Upon regaining awareness, he rose and initiated a passionate kiss. His expertise in lovemaking left me in awe as waves of sensation enveloped my body. I was now completely consumed by desire as he intensified his rhythm. As the next climax approached, William kept pace with me. Eventually, we both found solace in each other's embrace. In the middle of the night, confusion engulfed me as I mistakenly believed I was with Mark, only to be startled by another man beside me. Feelings of guilt and concern for Mark's whereabouts flooded my mind. Evidently, I had disturbed William, prompting him to wake and reassure me with a kiss, alleviating my guilt. The following morning, as I attended to my morning routine, William approached me from behind, exuding insatiable desire. Returning to bed, we held hands before I took charge, straddling him, enraptured by the passion and ecstasy reflected in his expression. Once again, our passion culminated in a final climax, fulfilling my every expectation and leaving me elated. Thanking William for the wonderful night, it felt natural to intertwine our hands as we descended the stairs to the dining room, eagerly anticipating another night together. However, when I glanced at Mark, everything unraveled. Swallowing my panic, Mark's explosive outburst disrupted everything. It became evident that he hadn't slept with Charlotte. Despite my preparations for his departure, I was unprepared for his unexpected anger. His cold rage was unsettling as he systematically dismantled my arguments with logical precision. Despite William's support, Mark's swift rebuttal left me wavering. After his departure, I collapsed into tears, and for the first time, William appeared uncertain. Upon regaining consciousness, I attempted to locate him to no avail. Jack and William then suggested halting everything by offering more money. When we later presented Mark with this offer, I was astonished by the outcome. William's once commanding presence had dwindled so significantly that he appeared trivial. Previously, his authority was such that I unquestioningly accepted his every word, but now it was undermined to the extreme. Despite his assurance that we could enjoy ourselves without jeopardizing my marriage, this plan disintegrated, leaving me uncertain about everything. I then erupted into an irrational fury, assuming I would extend my stay on the island for enjoyment. However, Jack's calm yet cutting response caught me off guard. "Don't be foolish, Lucy. If you want any chance of saving your marriage, seek forgiveness. Your words must be genuine and sincere. He doesn't seem inclined to change his mind." Personally, I couldn't disagree with anything he said during breakfast. I was even more startled when Jack informed William that things would never be the same again. He went on to affirm Mark's decency and argue that he didn't deserve any of the trouble we caused. William, he suggested, should heed his advice and mature. I was astounded to find Mark at the evening dinner. Despite my attempts to engage him in conversation, he simply ignored me. His departure with Charlotte left me devastated. Although I considered chasing after him, what could I say? After all, I had essentially encouraged him to leave and spent much of the trip rationalizing casual encounters. I felt enraged and betrayed, especially upon recollecting my own past actions with Mark. The fact that our actions were premeditated and widely known only intensified my feelings of guilt. I couldn't help but think I deserved it, perhaps hoping that mutual indiscretions could salvage our relationship. The flight back, sans Mark, made me realize the dire state of my marriage, as he had found a way to leave the island ahead of us. I had never properly conversed with him. Following that incident, the gravity of my actions began to sink in, and waves of guilt overwhelmed me. I rationalized about the money. Who would turn down such an offer? My tears became uncontrollable sobs verging on hysteria. Jack and Margaret grew increasingly worried about my well-being. Upon returning home, Mark was present but declined to have dinner with me and the kids. I nearly held it together until they departed. Then I broke down in tears once more. Being excluded from the meal felt like an ominous foreshadowing of my future. When I regained composure, I struggled to anticipate what to say when Mark returned. The dilemma was that everything I thought of echoed what he had already expressed, and I felt embarrassed to seek advice from my mother or friends.
Upon arriving home, the kids retreated to their rooms, engrossed in their usual video games and phones. I observed Lucy in the kitchen, feeling a sense of unfamiliarity. She approached me, almost whispering, "Can we talk? I mean, really talk?" I shrugged, thinking that we should address this eventually, so why prolong it? "I'm sorry, Mark. I assure you it was just a one-time thing and I'll be yours again, faithful as before. The weekend. I did it for the money. It could change our lives as a family. I did it for us." "You did it for yourself. We were fine. Money wasn't an issue. You couldn't wait to jump into his bed. You must have enjoyed the fancy dinner and closeness. Overall, everyone had a good time. You're overreacting. It shouldn't mean anything. You really should skip the excuses, Lucy. It's nonsense, and you know it. This wasn't casual. It was a premeditated betrayal. Arrogant, selfish, all those traits I detest, and now I loathe you. So you did the same to that woman." "No, I didn't. I sought revenge because nothing seemed to penetrate your indifference. You couldn't see how it affected me. I wouldn't have even considered it if I had a faithful wife. And I hope it stings, really stings, so you might understand my pain. Only I didn't scheme this in advance, making myself look like a fool to everyone else. Speaking of which, how long did your secret scheme take? And was this your first time with him?" Her eyes widened. Then she seemed to grasp that this was a genuine and reasonable inquiry. "It marked our inaugural dinner, and I sensed his interest in me. Jack and Margaret seemed to be probing, subtly asking if I was intrigued. The four of us dined together, and for the first time in my marriage, I felt a stir of attraction toward another man. His self-assurance was captivating. Knowing it was wrong, I resisted vehemently, avoiding an affair. Then William floated the idea of broaching the subject of opening up our relationship with you and gauging your thoughts on change. We briefly discussed it one evening, but it was evident you wouldn't consent. Then he proposed this plan, thinking the money would sway you. As the trip neared, nerves set in, and he suggested inviting Charlotte to ensure your agreement. Though I wasn't keen on the idea by then, I simply wanted it to unfold. I thought even if you didn't wholly endorse it, we could bounce back. But at breakfast, you shattered these notions, and I began to grasp the consequences of my actions. Was it worth it? Lucy sighed. No, definitely not. I got swept up in the moment and heeded his words. I never intended to hurt you. Oh, so unintentional pain. Straight to phase D. You seem to be enjoying this. Your energy during breakfast said it all. Now you're just telling me what I want to hear. Sorry, the honest answer is yes, I enjoyed it. He was good. It wasn't about being bigger or better, just different. It was exhilarating, a new thrill, and I was captivated by it. He's very experienced and skilled, but it was a one-time thing. Please don't abandon us and break up our family over a single mistake. I found myself smiling wryly. Funny, that's exactly how I'd describe what you've already done. Shattered our family over a one-time act. It's all on you. You're right. It's all my fault. I'm deeply sorry. I love you with all my heart. Well, not entirely. Part of it went to him. And even if you claim otherwise, your love wasn't enough to keep me faithful. How can I trust you again? I was so trusting because I never imagined you capable of this. I feel like I don't really know you. I can hardly bear to look at you, let alone pretend. This never happened. Lucy recoiled in shock. You can't claim to love me. I know. I never imagined losing you. I agree. You only considered yourself and your desires, neglecting me and the kids. But sometimes, love isn't enough. I stated that I tried to calm down and steer away from scoring points or escalating the argument. After a long pause, I continued, addressing Lucy. I mentioned that even if we decided to stay together and ignore the issue, things would never be the same. I emphasized that she had shattered the trust and sense of care we once had for each other, adding that she knew this more than anything. I reminded her that we cared about each other and the kids and didn't want anyone else to get hurt. I expressed my disbelief that she could hurt me like this. She expressed her love for me and admitted to making a colossal mistake, stating her willingness to do anything to rectify it. However, she disagreed with the idea of getting divorced just to appease me, mentioning that I broke her heart and threatened her, actions she believed were not indicative of true love. Lucy stared in silence, stunned, unsure of what else to say. We need to discuss the children. I believe kids are better off in separated families than in dysfunctional ones. So, from that perspective, divorce seems like the best option. I agree you should have custody, but don't try to prevent me from seeing them. It's for your benefit, too. They listen to me. You're not very good at setting boundaries. I furrowed my brow at the irony of her statement. And they're already testing you. It's better for you and for them if I remain in their lives. Lucy shrugged. Seriously, Lucy, regardless of what happens, don't keep the kids from me. Don't alienate me. I'm not a bad father. I treat them well and love them dearly. You haven't seen me angry yet. I'll fight you tooth and nail, spend all our money on lawyers, and we'll tear each other apart in the process. She nodded. I'd never do that. You're a wonderful father, and they need you. They'll want you to keep taking them on trips and coaching them in all their sports. I turned to her, surprised by the first comment where I felt she wasn't trying to manipulate me or justify her actions. Be careful, Lucy. You're seriously pushing Phase D. Even though you know who I am, why do this? I can't help but think you secretly wanted us to split up. Lucy urgently expressed, God, never. There's no excuse for this. I became selfish, convinced I could gain something more. It felt like I could somehow hold on to you. Why didn't you stop me that night and just leave? Reflecting on the situation, I mentioned finding it hard to breathe and needing to leave. After that, nothing seemed to matter much anymore. The fact that she pursued another guy at any cost meant I had already lost her. I suggested that the conversation ended us long before she ended up in his bed. Perhaps it was all over when she first started planning everything. She spent weeks talking to him and getting ready. Letting her go and not trying to stop her made it easier to accept the end. I emphasized that there was no turning back. That was the beginning of the end. The marriage crumbled in less than 4 days. We divorced, thankfully, without needing counseling. I think Lucy didn't want to justify her actions. It's a shame in a way. I hoped a professional could help her see how wrong she was. She did keep one promise, though, and in the end, we split time with the kids about equally. She even confessed to them that everything was her fault, without getting into specifics. They were old enough to understand, and often chose for themselves where to stay. They were at that age when parents became famous, as taxi drivers and loan sharks. I might be biased, but I think they're great kids and handled the breakup remarkably well. Children can be surprisingly resilient. As per the divorce terms, Lucy could keep our house until the kids came of age, then sell or buy it. But I still wanted it for the children. It allowed them to stay in the same school. Luckily, it paid off. By the time the kids went to college, real estate prices had soared. Lucy had to buy out my share, and it turned out to be the best investment of my life. How could she afford it? Well, we split $250,000 in the divorce. Like with Charlotte, I couldn't claim the moral high ground. What can I say? I'm a practical person. Either way, it seemed like a small price compared to the cost of the marriage and our once happy life. I left my job, received a payout to avoid the embarrassment of a tribunal, and started my own web design business. Lucy kept trying to reconcile, but I wasn't interested. So, was ending the relationship the right choice? It was messy, and there were no winners, but the dire threats and consequences never materialized. I wasn't going to forget or forgive that night.
My wife cheated on me with her boss, but I moved on to happiness while she lost it all. Yes, my wife cheated on me, and indeed she left me for another man. Initially, I was consumed by rage and wished to damage both of them, however, that never materialized. Nevertheless, I acknowledge this might appear as a revenge story, though that was never my intention. I'm Randy Clipson, just an ordinary guy. I'm not a handsome figure, and a significant portion of my life was marked by excess weight. A shift occurred in high school due to my involvement in football, earning me the nickname Chipper. They used to say that if I chipped someone, they were going down. At 6 feet 3 inches in height and weighing 260 lbs, playing football was somewhat expected. While not excelling as an athlete, I possessed substantial upper body strength even in high school, enabling me to push defensive linemen backward. Football proved instrumental throughout my 4 school years, aiding in shedding the excess fat I had carried for most of my life. Despite retaining a bit of a belly, the accumulated muscle more than compensated. Nonetheless, having been overweight for most of my life, the self-perception as a fatty lingered. Coupled with this mindset, I was painfully shy due to constant weight-related teasing during grade and middle school. In high school, being a football player shielded me from such mockery, and it came with certain privileges, no longer making me an outcast among the girls. Despite not attracting cheerleaders, some girls were willing to go out with me. Nonetheless, I didn't engage in much dating until my senior year when I crossed paths with Cindy. Cindy Crawley transferred to our school in the latter part of my junior year, but she caught my attention only in senior year. Despite possessing the most beautiful face I had ever seen, Cindy carried at least 30 to 40 pounds of extra weight. This deterred most boys in my class, and I regret to admit that I initially shared that lack of interest. Our connection deepened when we became chemistry partners. While the subject was complicated for me, Cindy excelled and provided significant assistance. I owe her for my success in chemistry, which likely paved the way for my college journey. During our partnership, I discovered Cindy's friendly and humorous nature, along with the shared background of starting school late. Cindy had overcome a congenital heart defect, and I was held back a year by my parents, making both of us 19. Summoning all my courage, I decided to ask her out, understanding her initial suspicion given her challenging past. Despite her reluctance, she agreed to go out with me. Our first date, a simple outing to the movies followed by an ice cream soda, was enjoyable. However, my shyness prevented me from attempting to kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her, and her thrilled reaction led to several subsequent dates over the next few weeks. By the third date, I summoned the courage to give Cindy a kiss on the cheek, progressing to necking and reaching first base. The more I encountered Cindy, the more my affection for her deepened. While my developing romance was progressing, the football season took an unexpected turn. Cavern High, my high school, wasn't renowned for football prowess, but this season brought a surprising alignment of stars. Kirk Simmons, our standout quarterback, led the team with the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, serving as our running backs. Now positioned as the left tackle, I successfully shielded Kirk's blindside, ensuring he remained unscathed. Despite losing our initial game to Mohawk High with a score of 21-7, a perennial football powerhouse, we rebounded with 7 consecutive wins, progressing to the regionals. Although we reached the state finals and suffered a 28-4 defeat from Towson High, there was a positive note, triumphing over Mohawk High in the semifinals with a satisfying 38-7 victory. My apologies for the occasional indulgence in reminiscing about the glory days of high school football. Meanwhile, my relationship with Cindy continued evolving to the next level. As prom season approached, I promptly invited Cindy to be my date. Her joyful acceptance was sealed with a big, affectionate kiss. Over the 4 weeks leading up to the prom, Cindy underwent a crash diet, shedding about 20 lbs to fit into the prom dress she had acquired. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Despite being what most guys might consider on the heavier side, I found her stunning. Cindy always had a generous bust, but it became more pronounced in that light blue prom dress. The dress struggled to contain her chest, which threatened to spill over. The entire evening was a dream as we danced together. As the night concluded, I suggested going parking, but Cindy had different plans, directing me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town. Cindy explained that her uncle had a small cabin he used for hunting. The cabin was indeed small, featuring only a tiny kitchen, a couch in front of a television, a bed, and a bathroom. We started on the sofa with our usual playfulness, concluding the night on a high note. Despite our extracurricular activities, I got Cindy back home 15 minutes before her 2 a.m. curfew. Cindy and I remained close throughout the rest of high school, engaging in a physical relationship while being cautious with protection. Following graduation, I received a partial football scholarship at a Division II school 2 states away, while Cindy opted for a local community college. My major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Since I was heading off to school, we discussed what to do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up, feeling it wouldn't be fair to hold each other back. It was the toughest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how awful I felt going off to school and leaving Cindy behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, it would happen. I was terrified of losing her and hurting so badly. Upon my arrival at Mountain Ridge University, the thought of heading straight home crossed my mind, but I couldn't go back on my commitment. I had pledged to honor my commitment to the university, and my strong desire for a college education fueled my determination. The only solution I could think of was immersing myself in football practices and schoolwork from morning till night. I dedicated myself to keeping my mind occupied, despite the coach's advice against it. My coaches and teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Taking a full load of classes and being a college football player meant shedding fat and building muscle through intensive weight training, resulting in both upper and lower body strength. With only a partial scholarship, my parents covered the remaining balance, even though I knew they struggled with the cost. Playing football left me with no means to contribute financially. While I lacked funds to come home, I made a weekly call to Cindy, who appeared as devastated by our split as I was. My first college year concluded successfully, excelling in both football and academics. By the third game of the season, I earned a spot in the starting lineup, shifting to play left guard due to my slower speed. My increased strength proved beneficial, contributing to our 8-2 season record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list, much to my parents' delight. During the summer, Cindy and I resumed our relationship. I found myself deeply in love with her, or so I believed at the time. Reflecting on it, I've questioned whether it was love or just lust. After careful consideration, I lean towards love, as a small part of me still holds affection for her. I worked and took 3 online courses during the summer, determined to finish college as soon as possible. Cindy and I also resumed our bed activities, exploring each other's bodies whenever possible. I completed college in 3 years and married Cindy right after graduation. Both employed by the multinational software and electronics company Tri-Orbit Electronics in Virginia, we worked in software development and human resources, respectively. After saving enough money, we purchased a small house and began discussing starting a family. The first 3.5 years of our marriage were wonderful. Except for one aspect, we both gained a significant amount of weight. Cindy reached 230 lbs, and I weighed in at 310 lbs. I carried the extra weight better due to my height, but neither of us was content with the excess pounds. Despite unsuccessful attempts at dieting, my love for Cindy remained unwavering, regardless of her size. After 3 years of marriage with no kids, we consulted our family doctor. Following a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us but suggested weight loss might aid Cindy's conception. So, for the first time in our lives, we embarked on a strict diet. 6 months later, Cindy was down 50 lbs, while I was only down about 25, but I must admit that I cheated more than I should have. Cindy's weight loss was noticeable, attracting attention from men. Alongside the diet, Cindy began going to the gym 5 days a week. Observing her transformation, I realized I had to step up my efforts. I strictly adhered to our diet and started hitting the gym with her. By the end of 1 year of dieting, Cindy had shed 80 lbs, and I had lost 90. While we both felt really good about ourselves, sadly, our weight loss was going to bring me a broken heart. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she started dressing in more revealing clothing. Initially enjoyable, I became displeased when I overheard some comments at work. However, I couldn't say anything because for her whole life, Cindy had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me arose when Kirk Simmons was appointed head of human resources. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior programmer, and he was now 2 levels above me, becoming Cindy's boss. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. Hardly noticing her, I ended up dancing with her at my wife's request as she danced with her boss during a Christmas party. I danced a few times with Susie, while Kirk partnered with Cindy, dancing just beside her. I found myself becoming noticeably excited. It wasn't a big deal, though, as, still being in my 22nd, any pretty girl could elicit the same response. One surprising aspect was that she wasn't a stuck-up snob, which pleased me. Upon Kirk and I arriving, "I didn't recognize you or Cindy," Susie complimented us, expressing that we looked fabulous. My perception of Cindy's beauty had always been high, but now she was truly stunning. I mentioned, somewhat embarrassed, that someone should keep an eye on her. The response was a simple, "Thank you." I expressed gratitude for Susie's kindness, and she blushed in response. The music concluded, and around 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy revealed a significant decision. She informed me of her choice to resume taking birth control pills. I raised objections, inquiring about our plans for having children. She straightforwardly mentioned that she had decided not to have any at the moment. My anger surfaced as I probed into her abrupt decision. She reassured me, stroking my arm, stating, "Look, we can have kids. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." In hindsight, I should have recognized the problem at that moment, but I was clueless, having complete trust in Cindy. Unfortunately, my trust in Kirk was misplaced, as I could trust him as far as I could throw a bus. Unbeknownst to me, Kirk had put on a full-court press to get Cindy. She, of course, was flattered beyond belief that the former football captain of our high school team was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late and then going, supposedly, out with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a PI company, and within a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk engaging in a lovemaking act in the office. How they obtained that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them being affectionate at dinner. Videos showed Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. Lastly, there were pictures of them engaging in a lovemaking act on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having closeness with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. I spoke coldly, asking what the other person had to say. She mentioned that she didn't intend for it to happen, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. Cindy reacted, expressing disapproval and stating that there was no need for crudeness. She implied that if I had paid more attention to her, the situation might have been avoided. Initially taken aback, I briefly considered whether I had neglected her. However, my anger resurfaced, and I asserted that she shouldn't try to shift the blame. I maintained my innocence and confronted her about the affair, asking for her explanation. She looked nervously at me but remained silent. I pressed further, inquiring about our next steps. Struggling to control my anger, I questioned whether she wanted to be with Kirk or with me. Despite expressing love for me, she tearfully admitted to also loving Kirk. I conveyed that a decision needed to be made, almost biting my tongue. I set a deadline, insisting on knowing her choice by the next day. If she chose to stay with me, she would have to sever ties with Kirk, resign from her job, and commit to attending counseling. Cindy acknowledged this. Later, I retrieved all her belongings, placing them in the hall, and informed her that she could sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The next day, I returned home early from work. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table, as I had the previous night. She took a seat across from me, and I demanded to know if she had made up her mind. Tears started to flow down her cheek as she expressed her love for me, but admitted an inability to give up Kirk, stating that she loved him too. I sighed deeply, attempting to conceal the fact that my heart was breaking. Acknowledging her choice, she simply nodded, causing a pain deeper than if someone had stabbed me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between eliminating them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. I sarcastically remarked that she had chosen quite the winner. Bringing up Kirk and Susie's new baby boy, I questioned whether it bothered her to leave the child without a father. A hint of anger and shame crossed Cindy's face as she mentioned that Kirk had planned to divorce Susie before their involvement. Continuing, I asked if she was willing to discard almost 4 years of marriage just like that. Struggling to contain both my temper and tears, I sought an understanding of her decision. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering smacking Cindy to a pulp and then going to look for Kirk to break his neck. She softly expressed regret for any hurt caused, her voice tender. She clarified that she hadn't intended for it to happen, but had fallen deeply in love with Kirk, and he felt the same way. Despite feeling an intense urge to damage her at that moment, I recognized the importance of maintaining control. It required all my self-control, but I eventually succeeded. Deep within the logical part of my brain, I recognized that resorting to physical violence would yield nothing. I refrained from revealing the depth of my hurt and refused to beg her to stay, considering it the worst thing a cheated-on husband could do, a sign of total weakness. I plainly stated that if the other person desired a divorce, they would have it. Confusion filled her eyes, and perhaps I imagined it, a hint of hurt. She might have expected me to fight to keep her, but I knew that if she had decided to leave, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was taken aback by my behavior but rose and started packing her belongings. The following day, I visited the bank and our financial advisor, explaining the situation and withdrawing half the funds from each account. I then established separate accounts in my name only, canceled all our credit cards, and applied for new ones solely in my name. I listed our house for sale through a realtor friend and finally consulted a divorce lawyer. With a heart full of hatred, I ensured Cindy was served at work, citing infidelity as the cause. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward. With only about 4 years of marriage and no children, there was nothing to dispute. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was messier. Dealing with a child under a year-old and Susie having never worked, he faced child support and alimony. One aspect of Kirk's divorce that admittedly brought me some satisfaction was his decision to cut costs on his lawyer. Instead of limiting spousal maintenance to a year or two, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't pleased, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were finalized, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The initial week post-breakup left me utterly lost. Not being much of a drinker, that held no appeal. For weeks, revenge consumed my thoughts. I'm sure every guy who's been cheated on can relate. I even began searching the internet for information on how ex-husbands sought revenge on their former wives and lovers. I found myself in a dark place, even purchasing a weapon. Then, as I read story after story about guys getting revenge, a shift occurred in my perspective. Initially, my thoughts of revenge were centered on violence. Subsequently, I considered damaging their property, contemplating ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and various other impractical schemes. As I read more revenge stories, I recognized the absurdity in most of them, realizing no feasible way to achieve the revenge I desired. Eventually, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor spent almost 2 hours explaining that seeking revenge wouldn't alleviate the hurt from my wife's betrayal. Regardless of how much pain I inflicted on my former wife or her new husband, the emotional anguish would persist. The pastor's advice, though seemingly simple for someone with my kind of pain, emphasized that only time and distance would heal my heart. Despite my initial skepticism, I acknowledged that being near Cindy without the possibility of being with her would continually reopen the emotional wound. I also accepted the pastor's truth about revenge. It wouldn't alleviate the hurt. Consequently, I followed his counsel, necessitating the establishment of distance between Cindy and me. An opportunity arose when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised significant profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's entirely classified, so I can't provide details. Suffice it to say, it aimed to position the United States ahead of Russia and China, contingent on my company's successful delivery. The rumor circulating was that the project was significantly behind and over budget, making it different from typical government contracts. While substantial profits were at stake, the company faced great risk. Unlike other government projects, there would be no progress payments during the development of this software and its accompanying electronic components. Tremendous penalties loomed for late delivery, and the company could possibly go under if the project didn't meet the contract requirements. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to consult on the impending disaster. Most other designers were hesitant to get involved, updating their resumes and considering leaving the company. Taking on the project meant risking termination and potential company collapse. The stigma of failure would linger for a long time. However, considering my modest needs post-divorce, the prospect of losing my job seemed manageable. Learning that Cindy was pregnant added emotional weight, as I had always envisioned starting a family with her. Evaluating the project data provided, it became clear that the chosen direction wouldn't work. Despite the risks, I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California, putting about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. Reminiscent of my first year in college, I delved into my work, enduring long days, sometimes spanning 20 hours, leaving little time to contemplate Cindy. I terminated 3/4 seconds of the programmers and all engineers handling electronic components, bringing in fresh talent. Despite the looming 11-month deadline, I scrapped their progress, relying on the creativity of engineers I brought on board, including some poached from rival companies. Their skepticism turned to astonishment when I explained what I wanted them to build and why I envisioned the electronic components in that particular way. Yet the challenge shifted to making the software functional. Gradually, we crafted a program that instilled confidence in me. It wasn't until 3 weeks before delivering our product to the military that I was certain of our success. The initial test merging the software and electronic components displayed a 96% success rate. Scanning the 4% that hadn't worked, I identified easy fixes. The revelation of our program's success triggered a surge in company stocks by over 300 points within a couple of months. Subsequently, the Defense Department announced the expansion of our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines, forecasting billions in profits. The success didn't halt there. I recognized the potential to tweak the program for various commercial applications. Essentially, we removed all classified information, creating an outstanding platform for practical uses. The array of things adaptable to this program seemed boundless. Following this triumph, I earned a promotion to Senior Vice President, tasked with developing these commercial applications. In the years that followed, frequent returns to the Virginia home office never led to encounters with Kirk or Cindy. Despite not anticipating any impact on me, I desired no contact, having nothing to convey to either of them. The pastor's counsel about putting time and distance between heartbreak had proven 100% accurate. I had moved on. During one visit, I unexpectedly met Kelly Bailey, a former cheerleader from Cavern High and Susie's best friend. Aware of her marriage to Jason Bailey and having a son before I met Cindy, I always harbored a crush on Kelly, the prettiest cheerleader. Kelly's warm demeanor in high school made her impossible not to like. Although she had aged somewhat, she remained physically attractive. In contrast to Cindy's short blonde hair and ample figure, Kelly, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, had long black hair and a proportionally smaller chest. A shared warmth in their smiles was the commonality. Stunned that she recognized me in a grocery store, preparing for a board presentation, we exchanged smiles. Despite a few gray hairs and small wrinkles, I still had a slight crush. Kelly called out to me as I pondered over frozen dinners. Upon recognizing her voice, I blushed slightly. She then stopped her basket next to mine, and I greeted her with a smile, expressing my flattery at her recognition. She confessed that she wouldn't have recognized me if Susie hadn't pointed me out during lunch at Tri-Orbit. I was genuinely surprised when she mentioned that. She then smiled and confirmed that she had been working at Tri-Orbit for about 6 years, specifically in the marketing department. It surprised me to learn that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a twinge of guilt for not knowing that, however, since I had little involvement with marketing, I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt like I should have been aware. "How are you doing?" I eventually asked to ease my discomfort. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real idiot. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also with half a dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty lightly considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't own a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hassle him for it every month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son, Scott. I get furious when I think about it," she said. I apologized to Kelly, expressing regret over Jason's behavior. I admitted that although I was aware he had a wild side, I had hoped he would calm down after marriage. Pausing for a moment, I looked into Kelly's emerald green eyes, feeling unsure of what to say next. Eventually, I mentioned that my wife and I were divorced, with Cindy choosing to pursue. "Todd? No, Randy?" Kelly shook her head. "It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it." "I suppose I can't argue with that," I admitted, "but it takes two to tango." "You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?" she asked, eyeing my cart. "Yeah, I'm afraid so," I nodded. "I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle." "Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good." Initially, I hesitated, but the idea of a home-cooked meal proved too tempting to resist. I mentioned that I wouldn't mind having a real meal if it wasn't too much trouble. I couldn't recall the last time I had one. The evening turned out to be delightful. Kelly made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was enjoyable having someone to converse with. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like me. We had a great time discussing the team and their prospects for the upcoming season. I was a diehard fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company covered them because I would take potential clients to the games. When I didn't have any clients, I'd invite my buddies, and if I couldn't find anyone to go with me, I'd go alone. I'd give away the other 3 tickets, usually to people trying to buy from a scalper. Scotty expressed a wish to attend a game someday, sounding wistful. In response, I impulsively offered to make it happen. Once the words left my mouth, I realized I had overstepped and swiftly attempted to rectify it. That is, of course, if your mother approves. Scotty turned to his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is, "We'll discuss it." At the end of the evening, I apologized. "I'm sorry about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offer. It slipped out before I realized. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him attending a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him." She stood there with piercing eyes, and I realized that I had made another mistake. Quickly, I attempted to rectify it but only ended up making another blunder. After a brief pause, I stuttered out that the invitation also extended to her. I suggested securing separate rooms, with one for Kelly and Scotty and another for myself. Despite feeling embarrassed, Kelly simply smiled and called me the sweetest man. While chuckling, she remarked that my expression was priceless. Feeling relieved, I sighed as I truly didn't want to offend her. I enjoyed her company and hoped we could meet up from time to time. Deciding to push ahead, I said, "Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to." Kelly studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me, and I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty." Over the following year, I'd call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we'd get together several times. I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door unexpectedly, I was engrossed in watching a local sports station analyze the Bucs game. Concerned, I asked if everything was all right, particularly about Scotty's well-being. Kelly reassured me with a smile that nothing was wrong and that Scotty was sleeping peacefully. Excited about the playoffs, she expressed a desire to have a drink and talk. Feeling a bit underdressed in my boxer shorts and t-shirt, I mentioned that I needed to put on some pants before inviting her in. However, upon searching for my trousers, I realized they weren't where I thought I had left them. Kelly said there was no need for pants as she pushed the door open and entered the room hurriedly. As I continued searching for my pants without success, Kelly giggled at the situation, causing my face to flush red with embarrassment. She then suggested putting us on an even playing field if I felt uncomfortable and proceeded to remove her skirt, leaving us both in our underwear. With a smile, she asked me to mix her a drink and join her for a conversation. I went to the mini-bar, retrieving 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I mixed the drinks, Kelly climbed onto my bed and sat cross-legged, her white-laced underwear catching my attention. After handing Kelly her drink, I looked around the room for a place to sit. Sensing my hesitation, Kelly gestured toward the bed and invited me to sit beside her, reassuring me that she wouldn't bite. Despite still feeling embarrassed and red-faced, I nodded and took a seat next to her. A big swallow of my drink helped me relax as the rum coursed through my body. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Kelly kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled. "I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable. Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore." Kelly had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. We kissed a long time, with our tongues exploring every part of each other's mouths. She tasted so sweet. After we parted ways, I expressed admiration, mentioning that she was a beautiful and amazing woman. Kelly then laid her head on my chest. That night of passion surpassed my first time with Cindy. 6 months after that night, Kelly and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. Jason had been as big a turd as Kelly had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. Jason was still close friends with Kirk, and every time he came to Kelly's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great closeness Kirk and Cindy were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Kirk was still heading up the human resources department for the company. But Cindy had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Kirk and Cindy had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time, when I heard Kelly on the phone giving Jason hell for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs. Kelly spoke sternly, insisting that I needed to stay out of the situation. She expressed determination not to let him off the hook for child support despite his neglect of his son. I promptly withdrew my statement, acknowledging that the money in question belonged to Scotty. In December, I was set to be appointed executive vice president of the company. The announcement was scheduled for the Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, with around 400 to 500 attendees. I felt a bit self-conscious about the grand recognition at this event, but Kelly was overjoyed. She scolded me for complaining, insisting that I deserved the recognition. I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year, she said. I responded, suggesting that it may not matter. However, she countered with a smile, mentioning that she was married to the most beautiful woman in the world and had a surprise for me. We recalled a past incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber. I acknowledged the memory with a nod, which was followed by a silly grin. She confirmed that she was pregnant now, expressing her determination to keep me close. Embracing me tightly, she expressed her desire for a night in bed if we didn't have to attend the party. I confessed that I wasn't particularly fond of parties anymore, as I had to attend so many that they had lost their appeal. Kelly, however, still seemed to enjoy them, especially when I was with her. She had a certain aura that attracted people to her. We danced for a while before running into Kirk and Cindy, who were accompanied by Jason and his date, Kathy. I was genuinely surprised to see Cindy's weight gain and Kirk's protruding belly, while Jason remained in good shape. I speculated that Jason might still be actively seeking romantic encounters. I was unsure what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. Could I have your attention for just a moment? I realized it was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Tri-Orbit. I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Randy Clipson. A spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Kelly pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. Jason seemed pissed and jealousy filled Kirk's face. However, when I glanced at Cindy, there was a look of sadness and loss. Feeling uncertain about how to proceed, I watched as Kelly took charge. She greeted Kirk, Cindy, and Jason warmly, hugging each of them in turn. Then she turned her attention to Kathy, extending a polite handshake and expressing pleasure in meeting her. I took my lead from my wife. I shook Kirk, Jason, and Kathy's hands and gave Cindy a small hug. We chatted briefly and the music began playing. In a surprising twist, Kelly suggested, "Randy, why don't you dance with Cindy and I'll dance with my ex-husband? Kathy, why don't you and Kirk share a dance as well?" I looked at Kelly with a questioning expression, but she just smiled knowingly. So I danced with Cindy. I asked about Kirk and Cindy's well-being because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Cindy responded that things weren't going particularly well and mentioned that she suspected they were headed for a divorce because she believed Kirk had been unfaithful. Expressing genuine sympathy, I told her I was sorry to hear about their situation. Cindy responded skeptically, questioning whether I truly meant my apology, as she expected me to say something along the lines of, "It serves you right." I initially expressed shock at the comment, stating that I would never say such a thing. Then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something similar. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. Shortly after that, the music stopped, and tears began to stream down Cindy's face. She expressed regret, admitting that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life and lamenting that there was nothing she could do to rectify it. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel genuine sympathy for her. Kelly put her arm around me, prompting me to lean down and kiss her. I inquired about her dance with Jason, to which she responded with a smile, saying that he was still an idiot. He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down, and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him and told him, why? Why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world? I watched Cindy reach their table and sit down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Kirk and Jason appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I'd say that Kirk tried to put a move on Jason's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved, and totally happy.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I found out my wife was cheating last July, and ever since then, I felt like I've been living in the ninth circle of hell. It was something I never saw coming. I couldn't believe that Laura would do something like that. We'd been married a little over 8 years, and up until then, I thought I was the happiest man alive. I met Laura back in college. I was a computer science major, and part of my general ed requirements meant taking an English class. I wasn't exactly thrilled about spending time with poetry and stories by writers who were long gone. My brain felt like it was already packed to capacity with code and figuring out where the next party was. I fit the stereotype of a computer nerd. Tall, a bit lanky, just an average student. I was never good enough to make first string in any sport I tried, didn't belong to any clubs, and wasn't involved in anything after school. But I was good with computers. I was the guy everyone recognized and would nod hello to but couldn't quite remember the name. My love life before college was minimal, a brief fling with Clara Jones after my senior year of high school. Honestly, I think she felt sorry for me. We spent about 2 months together before she moved on to other people. After that, I mostly hung out with other computer nerds, swapping exaggerated stories about our non-existent love lives and joking about what we'd do if we ever got a chance with one of the pretty girls in class. Then I met Laura, and my life completely changed. We ended up sitting next to each other in English class, and I was immediately captivated by her deep hazel eyes. I was lost in them, like staring into warm, endless pools. That first day, all I saw were those eyes. But as she got up to leave, I finally took in the rest of her. Laura had shoulder-length blonde hair with a gentle curl at the ends, a cute button nose, and lips that naturally turned up at the corners. She wasn't as tall as I was. She seemed about 5 feet 7 inches. My knowledge of bra sizes was non-existent, but I did notice she filled out her shirt in a way that made my heart race. She wore tight jeans that hugged her figure just right, accentuating her perfectly. To me, she was flawless. Every day after that, I made it a point to sit next to her. After a month, she spoke to me. She said that she noticed my calculus books and asked if I could tutor her as she was taking college algebra and having a difficult time. She said that she needed to pass the class to graduate. I would have agreed to anything she asked. After that, we met in the library Tuesdays and Thursdays after class. I tried to keep focused, but having the most beautiful girl next to me turned my mind to mush. Something must have worked because Laura got a B on her midterm test. She was so happy. When she got the grade, she jumped up and down and grabbed me for a hug. She kissed my cheek, and I thought my head was going to explode. I was in heaven. Then I said something completely out of character for me. Do you want to see a movie on Friday? Sure. What time? Wait, what? I fumbled. I said yes, dummy. I don't think my feet touched the ground all the way back to my dorm room. I spent the rest of the week in a daze. I even went to the store to get a new pair of Dockers and a polo shirt to wear. My nerd friends teased me no end. I took it with a smile on my face. I was counting the minutes until my date, but I survived somehow by the time Friday night arrived. Our first date was to the latest Halloween movie. I know, real classy. It was a typical slasher movie with blood, dismemberments, and stupid characters. I thought that she would have to sit really close to me because she was frightened. Not so much. But we had fun. Laura and I whispered who would be the next kid on the screen to get it. She was right more often than I was. And later, I got a quick goodnight kiss on the doorstep. On our fourth date, she invited me into her dorm room and we clumsily made love. It must have been good for her because she invited me up again after our next date. From there, we became a couple. Amazingly, we had a lot of things in common. We liked the same movies, read the same books, and loved the same foods. After a couple of months, I was seriously in love. By the time finals rolled around, I was sure that she was in love with me. We were happy. Right before Christmas break, we were laying in her bed when I told her that I loved her. I said that she was the best thing to happen to me. She smiled and said I love you too. Life was great. Even though we didn't have any classes together in the spring semester, we still studied together in the library every day after classes. We picked up right where we left off after the break, with our love getting stronger each week. We spent spring break together. We rented a cabin at the lake. I intended to go hiking and fishing, but I don't think we made it out of the cabin the whole week. On the last night, I got down on my knees and proposed. She said yes. 3 months later, we graduated, and 5 months after that, we were married. After school, I got a job doing computer security. Our company integrated security software into computers of small businesses that had anything from 10 to 50 workstations. I wrote code to make the different systems talk to each other. My boss was Bob. Bob started the company 10 years ago with just 2 employees. After a couple of mergers and buyouts, his company had grown to about 50 employees and was doing great. Bob was a good boss and mentor. After I had been with the company for about 5 years, Bob got an offer to sell out. He said some big venture capital group in the city needed our position in the small business market to complement a larger computer division. He said the money was too good to pass up, and he sold. He did stay on as manager, and part of the deal was that we all kept our jobs. The overall effect was minimal. We never saw the new owners, and Bob continued to run it his way. Work continued on uninterrupted. Laura got a job right after graduation with Dr. Moore, a dentist. She took over the role of office manager. Her boss was a kindly old dentist that reminded me of the absent-minded professor, right down to the funny glasses on the end of his nose that he was always searching for. Dr. Moore always seemed lost, but he was a magician in a mouth. His dentistry skills were the best in the area, and patients came from long distances to have him work on their teeth, if they could get an appointment. When Laura began working there, the office was in a shambles. Bills were unpaid, files were lost, billing systems were antiquated, and it was a general mess. Laura set about to clean it up and help the good doctor to a better practice. The results were revolutionary. After 3 years, the good doctor's practice was the envy of the region. Revenues were up, office turnover was eliminated, morale was high, and the doctor even dressed better. Laura was responsible for all of it. I was very proud of her. After we married, Laura and I got a little apartment near my job. We christened every flat surface and every room numerous times. We both decided to get our careers going before we had kids. Every year, we took a vacation around our anniversary. At first, we couldn't afford much and went back to our cabin by the lake. After a couple of years, our vacations got a little better, and one year we flew to Florida and spent a week at Disney World. About 5 years in the apartment, we decided to look for a house. After looking around for a couple of months, we picked a small house with enough room for our soon-to-be family to grow into. We bought it and moved in. Again, utilizing every flat surface and every room for our sexual gymnastics. After about 7 years, Laura came home from work very excited. It appeared that the management and organization of the good doctor's office was being noticed. The doctor had a couple of big-dollar executive types as patients, and they had been asking about Laura. They noticed the office's turnaround and commented to the doctor. Dr. Moore could not say enough about Laura. One of the executives approached Laura with a job offer. That night and over the next few days, we discussed the offer. I felt that we were on the verge of starting a family and that this new job would set that back a couple of years. We didn't need the additional money, and Dr. Moore was like family to us. She felt that this could open up to greater opportunities in the future. If we could hold off on the family for a couple of years, she said she would make it up to me. I didn't have much of a choice, and I relented. 1 month later, Laura began as the personal assistant to Alistair Miller, vice president of finance for Cascade Capital. I didn't know at the time, but Cascade Capital was the venture capital firm that ultimately owned the company I was already working for. Early on, I never noticed a change in Laura or in our relationship. Our lovemaking did decrease, but I assumed it was because of the sometimes odd hours she and her boss worked. Occasionally, she had to attend meetings with him past dinner and was tired when she got home. In the later months, our sex life began to suffer more. I tried to do things to please Laura, but she ignored all of my advances. I don't think we made love for the 2 months leading up to the awards dinner. The concept of her cheating on me was so alien that I never even considered it. I found out that Laura was cheating with her boss on the day of her company's annual awards dinner. I would not believe it. Each year, her company has a dinner to celebrate the past year's successes and recognize the big players. We were invited to go. As we prepared to leave, I still could not believe that Laura was cheating. I reviewed the past months in my head and could not see anything. We loved each other. I loved her and trusted her with my life. Looking back, I may have suffered from love blindness. I needed some kind of proof that Laura was unfaithful, some sign that I could confirm with my own eyes. I took my blinders off and got ready for the dinner. As I watched her prepare, I took careful note. What was she wearing? What her makeup looked like? How much lipstick, thong underwear, stockings, all of it. On the drive, I said little. Laura was excited because Mr. Miller, her boss, was getting some kind of award. Most profit, or maybe most wives slept with. If this were true, my anger would sure be coming out next. I knew I had to control this to get the facts. Now I knew how Bruce Banner felt. We arrived right on time as Laura planned it that way. We quickly entered and Laura rushed off to make sure that everything was going well. About 15 minutes later, he walked in. On his arm was his wife. She was beautiful. What did he need my Laura for when he had that waiting for him at home? I walked over to the bar and got a drink and studied him. I saw how people gravitated towards him as if he were royalty, sucking up to the boss. I saw his phony smiles and the way he placated everyone. I hated him. Very quickly, Laura was at his side. Miller's wife, Caroline, moved off to say hello to some of the other executives' wives. From across the room, I watched how Miller and Laura interacted. I saw the glances, the touches on the arm, the smiles. It was definitely more than a boss/personal assistant relationship. Soon we sat down for dinner. Miller and his wife sat at the head table with us at another table, close by. Laura selected the seat facing Miller. Thus began a typical boring awards banquet. We had rubber chicken for the main course and long pompous speeches for dessert. After dinner, tables were moved out and the dancing began. I tried to keep Laura close to me, but often she said that she had to run over to Miller to assist with some tasks. Whenever they were together, I tried to keep an eye on them, but sometimes this turned out impossible. Laura's coworkers came up to me to talk, or some other distraction prevented me from constant vigilance. Laura and I danced a couple of times to both slow and fast songs, at times embracing and others inches apart. A little after midnight, I was getting tired. I mentioned to Laura that we should be leaving soon and, eventually, she reluctantly agreed. But first she asked for one more dance. On that dance floor, my world crashed. Laura was no longer wearing her underwear. I knew during the previous dances that she had her panties on and I could feel it. Now her backside was smooth. No sight of the blue thong I saw her put on this evening. I was crushed. In our entire life together, I had never known her to be without underwear. Even when I asked, she had refused. But somehow, she did it for him. We said our goodbyes soon after and left. The drive home was quiet, each of us in our own thoughts, in our own world. Or in my case, in my own hell. When we arrived home, Laura dashed upstairs saying something about needing a shower before bed. I mumbled something. It didn't matter anymore. I stripped off my suit, hung it up, and climbed into bed. A few minutes later, Laura crawled into bed beside me. She was wearing her long cotton nightgown. As she leaned over to me, she said, "Wasn't that a glorious night?" I pretended to already be asleep. She gave me a peck on the cheek and rolled over away from me. I heard her breathing change in a couple of minutes, signaling sleep. It was then that the first tears started to flow, soaking my pillow. The next morning, as I stood under the hot water of my shower, I think I experienced every feeling known to man. Love, hate, anger, pain. Then there were thoughts of more revenge, but also of leniency, sentiments of inadequacy for not being man enough to keep my woman, feeling foolish for not detecting her deceit before now, and finally, triumphant in my ultimate discovery. My thoughts bounced around inside me, colliding, becoming nothing more than noise inside my head. At the end of the shower, the overriding emotion was anger. I would make him pay. Somehow. In the following days, I looked for a way to make him suffer for what he had done to my marriage. Murder was out, nor did I think I could sneak up on him and use a lead pipe on his knees. There must be a way. I knew Laura had some responsibility for this mess also. She'd lied to me. She'd sworn fidelity and then betrayed me. I thought back through our history together. Where did I go wrong? What did I do to lose her respect? When did I lose it? Did she let herself be seduced by his money and power? I had trusted her, and I had invested years of my life in her because I believed in her. Years I would never get back. They both would pay. The solution presented itself a few days later. Laura had gone to the shopping mall for some new shoes. At least that's what she told me. On the counter sat Laura's laptop. If I could hack into their company's system, maybe I could find a way to make them suffer. I am a computer security expert, so I figured it would not be too difficult to hack their system. I booted her computer up, linked to her work system, and waited for the password prompt. Knowing Laura, her password would not be too hard to crack. But before I began my first attempt, I noted her day planner on the counter. Being married to a computer security expert, Laura wouldn't break the first rule of passwords, would she? I opened the day planner, turned to the letter P, and sure enough, her password was written right there. I began to look through the day planner and found a goldmine. Not only were her login and passwords written down, but Miller's as well as credit card numbers, bank accounts, birth dates, and social security numbers. I made a quick trip to Kinko's and copied of all the pages in her day planner. I would explore their system at another time. That time presented itself a few days later. Again, Laura left her computer on the counter while she went out. I booted it up and logged in using her password. Since she worked for the vice president, she had access to almost the entire system. I could see payroll, purchasing, accounting, and most of the production systems. I found the email system and looked around there a bit. I did not read or copy all Laura's emails. I did not want to read all the details of her liaisons. I was having a hard enough time just keeping food down as it is. There had to be a way for revenge somewhere in this system. I looked into the accounting system. Actually, it was a very basic system and not very well secured. Maybe my payback solution was in here. I looked at their purchasing system. It appeared that once an invoice was entered, it had to be approved and then moved for payment. Maybe I could make a couple of changes to an invoice after it had been approved, have the system forward the money to Miller or an account set up in Miller's name, and then wait for the auditors to catch him. Brilliant. Miller would be ruined. Laura would be out of a job, and the affair would be done. I set about my plan the next day. Using the information from Laura's day planner, I set up an account in Miller's name at a bank downtown. Then I went across the street into another bank and did the same. With the new account information in hand, I just needed a crack at Laura's computer to complete the transfer. The next day while Laura was at the gym, I struck. I logged in using Miller's password and went directly to the accounting system. I found an invoice that had been approved and opened it up. The invoice had a place for a rebate to the manufacturer. I entered 3% as the rebate and Miller's bank information into the bank routing field. I figured 3% would not raise an immediate red flag. I did the same on another invoice, sending the rebate to the other bank account. I closed out of the system and poured myself a drink. I opened the good scotch this time. The first drink was to congratulate myself on a great plan. The second drink was to help me forget about my failed marriage. I waited a couple of days and nothing happened. No police raids, no newspaper headlines, no nothing. Damn. Maybe the plan was good, but not the scale. So at my first chance, I got Laura's computer, logged in, and altered a couple more invoices. I got in and out in a flash. Still nothing. Maybe if I bumped the rebate to 4%. The next day, I jumped in the system, added a 4% rebate to 2 invoices, and jumped out. Our home life was stressed. I had stopped approaching Laura for sex, and she never came to me. I stayed up late at night to watch the Bulls, Blackhawks, Bears, or any other game that was on. We had cable as there was always some game on to keep me interested. Laura made a comment about my new interest in sports. I told her that these games were important and that everybody at work watched them. I had a very hard time even touching Laura. The thought that she had given what was once mine to another made my head spin. More than once after a hug or quick kiss, I would run to the nearest toilet with nausea. Then the game changed. When I got to work the next day, Bob called me into his office. He said that corporate wanted to send me to New York to update the branch office's security systems. I looked at Bob with a big question mark on my face. Me? Yes, they asked for you by name. They want you to fly out Monday morning and return Friday. They want you to update all the workstations and servers in the New York office. Bob, I don't do that kind of stuff. Updating software is an IT job. Why me? Bob replied, I have no idea. I tried to explain that's not what we do, and that is definitely not what you do. But they were adamant. It has to be you. No one else. Then I realized what this was. My wife's lover wanted me gone for a couple of days. I guess that they were not getting enough quality time together. I resigned myself. Okay, Bob, I'll go. Thanks. I have never had Cooperate make these kinds of demands, and I hope they don't continue. He handed over a couple of airline tickets. Oh, I thought, this crap will continue as long as Miller is out of jail. I just decided to kick my revenge plan up a notch. Later that night, Laura and I were having dinner. Life around the house had been different lately. I had been doing my best not to strangle her, and she had been doing her best not to have sex with me. I tested the waters a couple of times and made an attempt at a seduction, only to get shot down, coldly. Not that I could have followed through if she agreed, but I wanted to keep up appearances. I mentioned that I had to go to New York for the next week. She pretended that she would miss me. This is when I found out about Laura's involvement. Laura let it slip how excited she was about the theater next week. But when I looked up from my plate, she quickly changed her story to say she was going to the movie theater with her girlfriends to see the latest chick flick. I pretended not to notice the lie. I wondered where Miller's wife was going to be. She must be out of town too. What excuse did he use for her? I needed a scotch. I had been using scotch as an anesthesia more and more lately. That was not a good thing. Laura's participation in this New York farce brought her into my crosshairs. The next day, I opened a couple of accounts in her name at both the downtown banks. Before the weekend, I logged in and altered a couple more invoices. I sent a couple of the rebates to Miller's accounts and a couple to Laura's new accounts. Both would go down now. I could feel my whole persona changing. I was no longer the nice, fun-loving guy everyone knew. A darker side of me was emerging. A side I didn't even know was there. A side I didn't think I was going to like very much. Damn, I thought, their account people must be slow. What is taking them so long to discover the thefts? The trip to New York was both interesting and educational. The flight getting there was not good. I hate flying. Since 9/11, flying has become such a hassle. The added time needed to get through all the security made it a drudge. I am always exhausted when I arrive. This trip was no different. I went straight to the hotel and crashed. The next day, bright and early, I was at the branch office. I had the entire office updated by 2 p.m. the first day. I spent the rest of the day and the following day looking for things to fix. Worn cables, a couple of graphic cards, and a bad hard drive. All in all, the trip was a waste of my time. With each passing minute my anger at the adulterous lovers grew. Tuesday night I went to the hotel room and never left again, except for one quick trip to the top of the Empire State Building and left for home on Friday. I came home exhausted on Friday night. I gave Laura a quick peck in the cheek and went straight to bed. I think she appreciated that fact that she didn't have to make up an excuse to turn down any of my advances for sex. One thing the New York trip did accomplish was to question my view of the final outcome of this mess. What did I want the end to look like? What about Miller's wife, Caroline? During the next couple of weeks, I did get the opportunity to log into Miller's system a couple of times. I hoped those auditors would get a clue soon. By now, we were talking some big dollars sitting in those accounts. Then they sent me to Denver. Bob called me in and said that the New York office was very happy with my work, and they wanted the same thing in Denver. I looked at Bob and he just shrugged his shoulders. He said he had no clue why I was going and I believed him. When I got there, it was the same thing. I spent a couple of days on System Security 101 and the rest in the hotel room. Using Laura's computer, I logged into the lovers' fake bank accounts. All told, there was over $1 million in them. It was a given that Laura and I would be getting a divorce. Then I thought, is this money community property? I laughed to myself. However, over the next few days the thoughts of the money kept returning. If I sued Miller, I would probably win a big chunk of money. Couldn't I just take this money and call it even? I fought with the implications of this. Was I trading an immoral act for an illegal act? Was I that kind of person? But they had ruined my life, gutted me, and stolen my manhood. Was I even thinking straight? Screw them, let's do it. A week later they sent me to Miami. But this time I had a plan. I wrapped up all the security upgrades by Tuesday, and on Wednesday morning I was on a quick flight to the Bahamas. It was very easy to open a bank account in Miller's name down there. I made another trip to the Grand Caymans and opened another bank account in Laura's name. I was back in Miami in time for my flight home and arrived back at O'Hare very tired. I went straight to bed and didn't wake up until noon on Saturday. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Boston. The logistics were a little more challenging, but I still had time to sneak over to Zurich to open a couple of accounts there. When I got home, I began moving the money to the overseas accounts. I also moved the money from one account to another at various times. This is the way it went for the next couple of months. I was sent on a fool's errand every 3 weeks or so. Seattle, Phoenix, Atlanta, etc. The Phoenix trip afforded me the opportunity to jump to Mexico City to open an account there. This added another offshore account to flow the money through. At home, I kept logging into Miller's accounting system and altering invoices and forwarded the money to the local banks. From there it was sent offshore. I think the planning and sneaking around was the only thing that kept me sane during this time. My life with Laura had become one of roommates. We shared our lives when they collided, but she had her own world and she could not let me see any of it. I attempted to bring us together, but nothing worked. Whenever I attempted to get close, she began some kind of argument. Most of these arguments were over the most insufficient things, like how I put the dishes in the dishwasher, or putting my coffee cup on the counter rather than in the sink. Many times, I felt that these arguments were manufactured to deny me affection. One sneaky event that I was very proud of occurred in November. I got a hold of Laura's calendar and noted a day when she and Miller were to be at lunch. I waited until their lunch date started. I got a dozen roses and went to her office. All the girls in her office just gushed over the flowers and what a great husband I was then said. Unfortunately, Laura was at a meeting. They were just leaving for lunch, and I just asked if I could leave the flowers on her desk. They agreed. I moved into Laura's office and quickly shut the door. I sat at her desk and logged into her computer. From here, I fixed a couple of invoices and logged into one of the bank accounts. I knew that this would leave a trail. If those auditors ever got a clue, this would help. I then went into Miller's office and did the same. While I was on Miller's computer, I decided to look around a bit. Buried deep was a folder of pictures. I opened it up and saw various pictures of Laura in numerous sexual positions. This hurt, but not as much as in the beginning of this affair. I copied the folder to a thumb drive that I always carry. I left quietly. When I got home that night, Laura was all over me because of the roses. She said that was so romantic. It was one of the best nights we had in a long time. But I knew that tomorrow it would be back to my wife, her lover, and me. About a month later, I informed Laura that I was going to take a French class at the local community college. The class was Tuesday and Thursday nights. She could barely contain her glee. 2 more evenings she could spend with her lover. This was part of my new exit strategy, and any time away from Laura was less stressful. The manufactured work trips continued and didn't hinder the classes. I spoke to the instructor. He understood, and I ended up with AB in the class. The affair showed no sign of ending, and the auditors showed not sign of catching on. I wondered how these guys got to be so successful, and then I remembered Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Never mind. I knew that the whole thing was going to end soon. Laura's company had to close out their books by the end of the fiscal year. They had to catch the missing money by then, and they did. I was on another trip when Laura called me in a panic. I was sitting at the hotel pool in Los Angeles when she called. She said that some kind of audit was going on and that she was going to be late. She said don't bother trying to call her that night. I sipped my banana fuzzy umbrella drink and said, "Yes, dear. Good luck." Quickly, I pulled the pin on my exit strategy. I moved the funds to the Mexico account and grabbed a plane down there. I withdrew all the money in bearer bonds and stuck them in a safe deposit box in Los Angeles. Laura called me at about noon and said that there were some problems and could I get home quickly. I said that I was not finished with the security work, but would try to get home by Thursday. I ordered another of those banana drinks and smiled to myself. Well, the shitstorm has arrived. The next morning, the internet had news accounts of the 2 of them being arrested. The headlines read, "Executive and Mistress in Massive Swindle." The pictures were not flattering. The article stated that funds were siphoned from various accounts for the lovers' personnel uses. The article continued stating that the auditors had traced some of the money to the Grand Caymans, and that they would contact Cayman authorities to get access to the account. Bail was set at $1 million each. I arrived home Thursday night and was at the courthouse early Friday morning. I used the house as collateral for the bail money, and Laura was released to me by about 2 p.m. We drove home in silence while Laura cried. Once at the door, she ran up to take a shower. She said she had to get the jail smell off her. I recalled a similar run-up to the shower after last year's awards dinner. I poured myself a scotch and waited downstairs. A few minutes later, Laura came down dressed in a long bathrobe. She sat across from me and explained that she hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't take any money. She was innocent. She never said a word about the affair, neither confirming nor denying. And I never brought it up. I said it must be some kind of mix-up and that we would get an attorney and fight it. It was very frosty around the house while waiting for the trial. Laura spoke very little and said nothing about Miller. My life limped along. I went to work and came home. That's about it. Miller decided to fight the charges together with Laura, and they met occasionally with their attorney. Other than that, Laura did not leave the house. I don't know if their affair continued or not. I do know that Miller's wife, Caroline, filed for divorce. Laura was trying to be nice to me. Usually, Laura had some kind of meal prepared when I got home. Although she never spoke of Miller or the past year, I guess she was trying to bury it and keep us together. She attempted to seduce me a couple of times, and I let her. I followed the case in the newspapers at work. The paper said that the feds tracked the money from the Caymans to Zurich and then to Mexico. They said that they lost the trail there. So far, no money had been recovered. I kind of expected the police to come to arrest me, but so far none had. As the trial neared, Laura was trying harder to please me. Unfortunately, it was too late. I met with a divorce attorney and had him draw up the papers. The trial only lasted 3 days. By this time, the press had forgotten all about the case and had moved on to other scandals. Laura and Miller sat at the defendant's table at opposite ends with the attorneys between them. I attended all 3 days. I listened as the auditors described the crime and how they tracked the money. They laid out a good case with links to Miller's and Laura's logins. The defense tried to argue that the passwords could have been hacked, but then the prosecution connected the transactions to Laura's and Miller's computers. They were both screwed. The prosecution laid out Miller's character as being controlling, manipulative, and portrayed Laura as a gullible co-conspirator. I think the jury bought it. After 3 days, the jury retired to consider the verdict. Laura and I found a small conference room and sat. I wanted to end this. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the divorce papers. I had listed irreconcilable differences as the cause. Laura took them sadly. I said, I was going to file for adultery. Laura quickly interrupted, but that was never proven. But I have pictures. That shook her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of photos. I took the first of the stack and handed it to her. It showed Caroline and I at the top of the Empire State Building. Not adultery on your part, but on mine. I continued. Miller's wife Caroline came over to my office on the day of the awards dinner last year. She had a private investigator following her husband and had proof of his affairs. I say affairs, because you were not his first. I was devastated and I called her a liar. I didn't believe it until the dinner. I know you went off with him sometime, and I know he took your panties. The next day, I sent her an email to apologize. I had tears in my eyes. When you and Miller sent me to New York, I knew what the trip was for. It was so that you and Miller could get together. I wondered what you did to get Caroline out of town, and I was surprised when she showed up at my hotel room door on that Tuesday night. I invited her in, and we ordered a couple of bottles of wine from room service. We sat on opposite beds, got drunk, cried, and compared stories. She said that the private investigator recorded your phone calls when you were planning my trip. Before Miller had to think of a reason for her to leave, she volunteered to leave town to visit her mother. We spent the rest of the trip in the hotel room. The only time we went out was to visit the Empire State Building. I said that I had never been there and Caroline acted as my tour guide. You may not believe this, but Caroline and I did not touch each other the entire time. I gave her a couple more pictures. They showed Caroline and me in Denver. She showed up in Denver. She played some of the recordings of you and your lover. Mostly the ones where he was convincing you to cut me off from sex. I learned then why our sex life had died. It was over a bottle of scotch that Caroline and I held each other. Caroline and I were not in love. We were just a couple of poor souls pushed together by the actions of our mates. Together we tried to heal the wounds caused by Miller and you. I laid out more pictures of Caroline and I, Seattle, Phoenix, Boston. The pictures showed Caroline and I enjoying the sights and places that Laura and I talked about. We were becoming good friends with benefits by then. I said. Then I gave her the pictures from Miami. The pictures showed Caroline in a bikini. She looked good. In addition, there was another girl in the pictures. That other girl in the pictures is a good friend of Caroline's. Remember when I told you my fantasy of having two girls at the same time? Well, let me say it was everything I thought it would be. Laura was crushed. She had tears in her eyes. I felt bad too. If she had confessed her sins somewhere along the way, we may have been able to get past it. If she had come to me long ago and said that she wanted out of our marriage to be with Miller, I would have been hurt. But I would not have been destroyed like I was. I was sorry for the whole mess. I got up to leave and said goodbye, Laura. I loved you once. And with that I left. I was completely packed by the time the verdict came in. They were both guilty. Since none of the money was recovered, Miller got sentenced to 7 years. Laura got 3 years plus 2 years of probation. My attorney had the power to sell the house and all the remaining contents. I gave him direction to pack up all of Laura's stuff and put it in storage. All the money from the house was to be put in an escrow account for Laura, along with half the savings. I was on a plane to France by midnight. I sat on my veranda looking out over the Côte d'Azur. From my deck I could see the beach. I was a good 3 blocks from the beach and walked there most every day. As I sat, drank a good bottle of Côte du Rhône wine. I contemplated that year. I moved to the south of France and had not been back to the States in over a year, since the verdict. I had not spoken to or heard from Laura. I became a lonely recluse here in my chateau. I call it that, but in reality it is nothing more than a small house. But it is mine. Caroline has visited a few times, but that relationship will go nowhere beyond friends with benefits. Good benefits, mind you. Her friend did come along one time, and it was just as good the second time around. Caroline did quite well in her divorce, and she will make some lucky bachelor very happy, if he can overcome her distrust issues. She knew about my scheme to pay back Miller and Laura. She felt it quite fitting for the both of them. She is happy with her life and is moving on. I, on the other hand, have issues. Although I don't have to work, my ill-gotten gains can support me. I set up a little online business. I write software for integrating systems. Same thing I was doing for Bob. I can do it all from here. I got a couple of contracts and it keeps me busy. I even got an email from Bob. He recognized my work and offered to steer a couple of clients my way. I thanked him. The ladies at the patisserie laugh at my poor French, and every day they attempt to teach me a few more words. I figure that by the time I'm 100 years old, I should have it mastered. I have recovered some from Laura's betrayal and divorce, but I am having a harder time justifying my own actions. I remember reading a case study in a college psychology class. The case described a husband that went missing and turned up again years later. The case said that this husband was just getting out of work one day, and he disappeared. He lived in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and 2 young children. He was getting off early because the Oakland Athletics and the San Francisco Giants were playing a World Series game that day. The case study said that as he was leaving his office, the Loma Prieta earthquake struck. The man was almost killed. Bricks and large chunks of the building came down on both sides of him, narrowly missing him. At that instant, the man realized that he could have been killed. That realization served as a wake-up call. The man looked at his life and saw how unhappy he was. He saw all the things he wanted to do before he died. The man hurried home, packed, and left his wife and kids without a word. About 4 years later, the authorities found the man. He was happily married with 1 child. The police arrested him and sent him for a psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist deduced that when he was almost killed, the man reacted. His view of the world drastically changed to include the possibility of life ending at any moment, and the man acted accordingly. He ran away, leaving behind all his responsibilities. But gradually, he started to realize, perhaps subconsciously, that he wasn't living in a world where death lurked around every corner. He began to slip back into his old, comfortable life, returning to what he was before the earthquake, a happily married family man. Maybe that's how it is with me. When I was in love and could trust those closest to me, I was a good, honest man. I never cheated on my taxes, never lied, never even considered another woman. Laura was my world, and I loved her with everything I had. Losing someone is painful, but there's a unique agony in being betrayed by someone you love so deeply. It's a wound that buries itself in your soul, squeezing the life from your heart. When everything I knew shattered, I became someone different, a version of myself I'm not proud to know exists. Now, I have some choices ahead. Do I stay closed off, walls around my heart to keep that part of me locked away? Or do I start letting people in, a little at a time, to reintroduce the good part of me to the world? I don't know the answer yet, but the little blonde at the patisserie, she's kind of cute. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Then came the moment that still haunts me. Eliza had excused herself to the restroom, leaving her phone on the table next to her half-empty glass of wine. My gut had been churning for hours, my instinct screaming at me that something was off. I kept watching them throughout the night, the way Clark would lean in when she spoke, the way his hand would rest on her back just a second too long. I was tense, sitting there gripping my glass of scotch so hard I thought it would shatter in my hand. They thought no one was noticing, but I saw it. I saw everything. So, while she was away, I did something that went against everything I believed in. I reached for her phone. My hands were shaking, can you believe that? Me, the guy who tears apart legal arguments for a living, trembling like a nervous teenager. I didn't know what I was looking for. Honestly, part of me was hoping I wouldn't find anything, that I'd look like a paranoid asshole, and I could laugh it off later. But some part of me, deep down, already knew the truth. As I unlocked her phone, yes, I knew the passcode. We were married for Christ's sake. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I scrolled through her recent messages, nothing really standing out, just the usual back and forth with her coworkers and a couple of friends. My breathing was shallow, my eyes darting over each word, hoping, praying, to find nothing. And then, there it was. A message from Clark. Clark, of all people. At first glance, it was harmless. Can't wait to see you tonight, winky face, that's it. That's what it said. 7 words. 7 words that completely changed my life. The kind of text you could send to any friend before a party, right? But that stupid winking emoji at the end, that's what got me. That fucking wink was like a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't just some casual, friendly message. It was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. My blood ran cold. The words blurred on the screen as I sat there, frozen. I scrolled up, hoping to find some kind of explanation, something to convince me that I was jumping to conclusions. But the more I read, the worse it got. It wasn't overt, no. They weren't dumb enough to send anything explicit, but there was a subtext there, something intimate, something that went way beyond friendship. There were inside jokes, little flirtatious comments that they both knew only the other would understand. Things like, "Remember last time," winky face, and, "I hope we can find a better spot tonight." It didn't take a genius to figure out what they were talking about. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the ground beneath me give way. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my best friend, started crumbling down like a house of cards. You know that moment in movies where everything slows down, and the main character has this out-of-body experience? That's exactly how it felt. It was like watching my entire world unravel in slow motion, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I must have read that text a dozen times, my mind trying to make sense of it. My pulse was racing, my palms sweaty, the noise of the party around me fading into the background. For a brief moment, I even considered putting the phone back and pretending I hadn't seen anything. I mean, maybe I was overreacting, right? Maybe this was all just some innocent misunderstanding. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. This wasn't innocent. This was betrayal in its rawest form, and I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. Eliza came back from the restroom, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. She smiled, asked me if I wanted another drink, completely unaware that her entire charade was about to come crashing down. I slipped her phone back onto the table before she could notice I had been holding it, trying to act as normal as possible, even though I felt like I was about to explode. I forced a smile and nodded, my throat tight, my mind screaming at me to do something, say something. But I couldn't. Not yet. That was the moment I realized our marriage was hanging by a thread, and I had no idea how to fix it, or if I even wanted to anymore. I sat there, watching her, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that from this point on, nothing would ever be the same. I needed more proofs. As much as that text gnawed at me, part of me still hoped I was wrong. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild, fueled by paranoia and jealousy. Maybe that message didn't mean what I thought it did. I tried to convince myself it could all be innocent, that I was overthinking everything. But deep down, I knew the truth, I just didn't want to accept it yet. I needed to see it for myself, to be sure, because if I was going to confront Eliza and blow this whole thing up, I couldn't afford to be wrong. So, one evening, when Eliza said she'd be working late, I decided to follow her. Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of a bad detective movie, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She had been working late a lot lately, claiming she had big projects coming up, meetings with clients, and tight deadlines. I had swallowed her excuses for weeks, trying to play the understanding husband. But that night, I wasn't going to be played anymore. I waited until she left the house, her heels clicking confidently down the driveway, her perfume lingering in the air like poison. I gave her a few minutes to get a head start before grabbing my car keys and heading out. My heart was pounding as I tailed her, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't spot me. She wasn't headed toward the office, that much was clear. Instead, she was driving toward the city center, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Why the hell would she need to go downtown for work? After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a small hotel. You know the kind I'm talking about, cheap, quiet, out of the way, the kind of place where people go to disappear for a few hours. My stomach churned as I parked down the street, far enough that she wouldn't notice me but close enough to keep an eye on her. I watched as she got out of the car, casually glancing around, clearly making sure no one was watching. And then, right on cue, he showed up. Clark. There he was, my best friend, walking toward her like he didn't have a care in the world. Like he wasn't about to meet my wife at some sleazy hotel. I gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap in my hands. My chest was tight, and I could feel my pulse in my ears as the scene unfolded in front of me, a living nightmare I couldn't wake up from. They didn't waste any time. As soon as Clark reached her, he wrapped his arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world, pulling her in close. My breath hitched as I watched him lean down, pressing his lips to hers in a slow, deliberate kiss. It wasn't rushed, wasn't some quick, guilty peck. No, this was something deeper, something that screamed of routine. The way they moved together, the way their bodies fit perfectly, it was clear this wasn't the first time. Not by a long shot. I sat there, watching my wife betray me. Watching the woman I had loved for over a decade fall into the arms of another man. My best friend. My fucking brother. They stood there for what felt like hours, lost in each other, completely unaware that I was sitting just yards away, watching their every move. It was humiliating. I felt like a fool. Like every happy memory, every tender moment we had shared was suddenly a lie. And I was the idiot who hadn't seen it coming. The pain was sharp, stabbing at me with every second that passed, but mixed with that pain was something else, something darker. I was angry. No, I was beyond angry. I was furious. But even then, as I watched them laughing quietly and walking toward the hotel entrance, I didn't lose control. I couldn't afford to. Not yet. I wanted to storm out of the car and confront them right there. I wanted to scream, punch Clark in his smug face, and drag Eliza out by her hair. But that wouldn't have done any good. No, that would have been too easy for them. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I stayed put, silently seething, every fiber of my being focused on keeping myself together. Because I had a plan. I wasn't going to let this end on their terms. This wasn't going to be some pathetic story where the guy gets cheated on and just takes it. No. I was going to make sure they paid for what they did. But I needed time. I needed to think, to prepare. So, I sat there, in the shadows, watching them disappear into the hotel, knowing full well what was about to happen behind those walls. And instead of confronting them, I turned the engine on and drove away. My revenge was starting to take shape in my mind, and when it was all said and done, it wasn't going to be pretty. Revenge wasn't something I could rush. I needed to be smart, to gather as much information as possible before making my move. So, I became a shadow, always one step behind them but never letting them know I was there. I started by recording their phone calls. Eliza had become predictable, always stepping outside to take her work calls when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I installed a program on her phone, something I'd picked up from a tech-savvy client, so I could listen to everything. I followed her on days she said she'd be working late, waiting for her to meet Clark in one of their regular spots. The anger inside me was growing, building with every piece of evidence I collected, but I didn't let it consume me. Not yet. I didn't just want to expose them. That would have been too easy. If I'd just come out and told the world they were fucking behind my back, sure, it would have caused a scandal, but they would have moved on eventually. No. I wanted them to feel the same humiliation, the same pain that had been gnawing at me since the day I saw that text. They had to suffer, and I was going to make sure of it. And that's when the call came, Haley, Clark's wife. It was unexpected, to say the least. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. She and Clark had always seemed like the perfect couple, at least on the surface. If I was blindsided by Eliza's betrayal, I couldn't imagine what Haley was going through. But when she called, she was surprisingly calm. At first, I didn't think much of it. She just asked how I was doing, made small talk, the usual pleasantries. But there was something in her voice that caught my attention, an uncertainty, like she was trying to figure something out without coming right out and saying it. Then, after a long pause, she finally hinted at what was really on her mind. Troy, I need to ask you something. Do you think Clark might be seeing someone? Her voice cracked just a little, enough for me to hear the pain she was holding back. My throat tightened, and I felt my stomach churn. How was I supposed to answer that? Here she was, probably just starting to suspect what was going on, while I already had the whole sordid picture. I couldn't just dump it all on her over the phone. So, I stayed silent for a moment, trying to figure out what to say. She kept talking, as if the silence was giving her permission to spill her doubts. She told me how Clark had been working late more often, how he'd been distant, distracted. How she'd found herself wondering if there was someone else, but she hadn't wanted to believe it. She hadn't wanted to be that wife, the one who jumps to conclusions without proofs. But now, things were starting to add up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I wanted to tell her the truth right then and there. I wanted to just let it all out, tell her that not only was her husband cheating, but he was doing it with my wife. But something held me back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I didn't want to see her face fall the way mine had when I first found out. So, I just listened. I let her pour out her suspicions, her fears, everything she had been holding inside. And then she asked me the question that made my heart stop. "Troy," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. Do you suspect something?" Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and I knew I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. I had been holding on to this secret for too long, and it was eating me alive. So, I nodded, even though she couldn't see it over the phone. My voice was thick as I finally spoke. "Yeah, Haley. I do." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the pieces falling into place in her mind. But instead of breaking down, like I half expected her to, she was quiet. And then she said something I hadn't anticipated. "Let's meet." We met the next day at a small cafe, one of those quiet spots no one really notices. I got there first, and when she walked in, I barely recognized her. Haley had always been composed, put together, but now she looked different, tired, almost hollow. She sat down across from me, avoiding eye contact at first, nervously stirring her coffee as if the answers to all her problems might be hiding at the bottom of the cup. Neither of us knew how to begin, so we just sat there in uncomfortable silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been distant, Troy. Coming home late, making excuses. It's like he's not even here anymore. I don't know what to do." I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the table, trying to figure out how to say it. How do you tell someone that their whole world is about to come crashing down? I wanted to protect her from the truth, but I knew I couldn't keep it from her forever. So, when she looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you think he's cheating on me?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. "I think he is," I said, my voice barely steady. "And I think it's with Eliza." Her face changed in an instant, the sadness replaced by something colder, more resolute. But she didn't cry. She didn't break down. Instead, she leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing with a steely determination I hadn't expected. "Then let's make them pay." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't looking for pity or sympathy. She was looking for revenge. And suddenly, I realized we were on the same page. She wasn't going to be a victim, and neither was I. We were going to take back control, together. I nodded, the gears in my mind already turning. We were going to do this right, and when we were done, Clark and Eliza wouldn't know what hit them. From that moment, Haley and I started seeing each other more often. It was supposed to be strictly business, planning how to catch our spouses in the act, but there was something else growing between us. We were both broken, shattered by the betrayal of the people we trusted most. And in that shared pain, we found an unspoken connection. She understood what I was going through in a way no one else could. The more we talked, the closer we became. She'd vent about Clark, and I'd unload my anger about Eliza, but there was always this tension between us, something simmering just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. One evening, Haley came over to my place. It had become a routine of sorts, dinners, late-night talks, planning what we were going to do next. But that night was different. I had cooked dinner for us, something simple, but I could barely focus on the food. The conversation was strained. We talked about Clark and Eliza, how we'd get our revenge, how we'd expose them for the liars they were. But beneath it all, there was something heavier in the air. I could feel it, and I knew she felt it too. She looked stunning that night. Her long dark hair flowed over her shoulders, and her eyes, normally full of sadness and pain, sparkled with something else, something raw and untamed. She wore this simple black dress, nothing flashy, but damn, did it hug her curves. I tried to focus on what we were discussing, tried to keep my mind on our plan, but I couldn't help the way my eyes kept drifting to her lips, her neck, the way she moved. After dinner, we didn't get up right away. We just sat there, the silence stretching between us, heavy and charged. I could feel her eyes on me, and when I finally looked at her, she wasn't looking away. She was staring right at me, and in that moment, everything else faded. "Troy," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "we're just as much cheaters as they are." The words hit me hard, but she wasn't done. "But I can't keep this inside any longer." Her hand moved to my shoulder, her touch warm and electric. My breath caught in my throat. We both knew what was happening, knew what we were about to do. A part of me wanted to stop, to pull away and keep things from going too far. But another part of me, a part one hadn't felt in a long time, was pulling me toward her. It was like all the anger, the betrayal, the hurt, was boiling over, and she was the only person who could understand it. I leaned in, our faces inches apart, and before I could think twice, our lips collided in a kiss that was all-consuming. It wasn't soft or gentle, it was desperate, hungry, like we were trying to pour every ounce of our pain into each other. Her lips were soft, her breath shaky, and as I pulled her closer, I felt her body melt into mine. There was no turning back now. We didn't stop. I grabbed her by the waist, lifting her onto my lap, and she responded with equal intensity, her hands running through my hair, pulling me closer, needing more. We stumbled to the couch, bodies tangling together in a mess of raw emotion and desire. I hadn't felt this kind of passion in years, not with Eliza, not with anyone. Haley's touch, her skin against mine, it was everything I had been missing. The anger, the betrayal, it all faded into the background as we lost ourselves in each other. Her dress slid off easily, and soon we were tangled in each other's limbs, moving together with an urgency that surprised me. It wasn't just about sex. It was about reclaiming something we'd both lost, something our spouses had taken from us. Her moans filled the room as we moved from the couch to the floor, then to the bedroom, and even to the bathroom, neither of us willing to stop, neither of us wanting to come down from the high of forgetting who we were, if only for a few hours. The sex was wild, passionate, chaotic, a storm of emotions wrapped up in flesh and heat. We were two people trying to outrun our pain, using each other as an escape from the mess our lives had become. And for those few hours, it worked. I wasn't thinking about Eliza or Clark. I wasn't thinking about revenge or betrayal. I was thinking about Haley, about her body, her warmth, her breathless moans in my ear. But afterward, when the heat of the moment faded and the reality set in, I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a boulder. Haley was asleep next to me, her body curled against mine, but I couldn't close my eyes. The truth was gnawing at me, digging into my gut. I had betrayed Eliza, yes. But more than that, I had betrayed myself. In letting go, in crossing that line, I had become part of the very thing I hated. I had stooped to their level, and no amount of revenge would ever change that. After that night with Haley, everything shifted. It wasn't just the sex that changed things, it was the realization that I had crossed a line, both physically and morally. The floodgates had opened, and all the anger, betrayal, and despair I had kept buried for so long came rushing out. Haley and I continued seeing each other, but now, each time we met, there was a constant undercurrent of tension, a fear that we'd be caught. The passion between us was undeniable, but so was the growing anxiety. We were both playing with fire, and we knew it. Still, she was the only person who truly understood me during this time. With Haley, I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to wear the mask of the composed, successful lawyer who had it all together. She saw through all that. And as much as we tried to stick to our original plan, to get revenge on Eliza and Clark, the lines kept blurring. Our conversations became more strained, our meetings charged with a mix of passion and guilt. But despite everything, we couldn't stay away from each other. We were both too deep into this mess. Meanwhile, things with Eliza kept spiraling downward. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was like talking to a stranger. The warmth, the love, everything that had once made us work as a couple, had evaporated. Our conversations were cold and clinical, like two people forced to share the same space but with nothing left to say. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done playing the part of the oblivious husband. I had seen enough, heard enough, and felt enough. I didn't want to be the one who walked away looking defeated, though. No, after everything I discovered about her affair with Clark, I was determined to take control. If anyone was going to walk away with their dignity intact, it was going to be me. I needed to act fast, and I needed to be ruthless. Then came the call that changed everything. It was my private investigator. After weeks of following them, digging into their every move, he had finally delivered the one thing that would seal the deal: evidence. Real, hard, undeniable evidence. He handed me a folder filled with photos, videos, and screenshots of their conversations. There they were, in living color, Eliza and Clark, caught red-handed at that hotel. I had everything I needed to not only confront Eliza, but also to take her down in court. With cheaters, you don't play fair, and I wasn't about to start now. The moment I got that folder, everything shifted in my mind. I had been waiting for this, waiting for the moment when I could take control of the situation and flip the narrative. I wasn't going to let Eliza play the victim or manipulate the situation anymore. This was my move now. That evening, I decided to set the stage. I cooked dinner, nothing fancy, just enough to make it seem like a normal night. I poured wine, lit some candles, and waited. I had to keep calm, had to make it look like everything was fine. When Eliza came home, she was already suspicious. I could see it in the way she hesitated at the door, in the way her eyes scanned the room like she was trying to figure out what was going on. But she sat down at the table anyway, took a sip of wine, and forced a smile. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. I watched as she gripped her wine glass a little tighter. I started off slow, gentle, almost like nothing was wrong. I didn't want her to see what was coming. But the moment she started with her excuses, trying to justify her late nights, trying to pretend like everything was still fine, that's when I pulled out the photos. I laid them out on the table in front of her, one by one. Her and Clark, standing too close in that hotel parking lot. A picture of them holding hands, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. And the final one, a shot of them kissing outside the hotel. Her face went white as a sheet, the blood draining from her cheeks. She stared at the photos, her hands shaking. "How could you do this?" she finally shouted, her voice breaking with a mixture of fear and anger. But there was no remorse in her eyes, just shock that she had been caught. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just looked at her coldly, my words coming out like ice. "You're the one who betrayed us, Eliza. Not me." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over her. "I'm filing for divorce. And by the way, I've already spoken to my lawyer." That last line hit her hard. She hadn't expected me to be the one in control. She had assumed she'd be able to manipulate her way through this, maybe even turn the tables on me somehow. But now she was realizing just how wrong she had been. I wasn't the naive husband she thought she could play. I had the evidence, the leverage, and the upper hand. Eliza sat there, stunned, her eyes flicking from the photos to me, trying to figure out what her next move could be. But it was too late. I had already taken the first step, and there was no going back. The next day, I filed for divorce, armed with every piece of evidence I had gathered. I hired one of the best divorce lawyers in the city, someone who was as relentless as I needed them to be. We had one goal: to make sure Eliza walked away with nothing. I demanded half of everything: our joint assets, the house, the cars, everything we had built together. But more than that, I positioned myself to take financial control. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to win. After I filed for divorce, things began to move faster than I expected. Eliza, who thought she could somehow save her reputation, was left scrambling. But it was too late for damage control. Word of her affair with Clark spread through our social circles like wildfire. In no time, she lost several of her key work contracts. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal, and even the clients who once praised her cut ties. She was drowning in the mess she'd created, and the harder she tried to swim, the more she sank. And Clark? That cocky bastard thought he could slither out of the situation without consequences. He was wrong. Haley made sure of that. She had been quiet at first, letting me take the lead with Eliza, but then she moved in for the kill. Right after I filed for divorce, Haley filed her own. But she didn't stop there. She made sure that her testimony was brutal, exposing Clark's affair, his neglect, and his shady business dealings. Her accusations tore him apart, not just personally but professionally as well. The plot twist came when Haley and I decided to team up in more ways than one. While Clark was distracted, dealing with the fallout of his personal life, I went after his business. I struck deals with some of his key clients, the ones who saw the writing on the wall and knew that Clark was finished. They switched to me without hesitation. I made sure they knew I had the upper hand, and soon enough, Clark's entire business empire was crumbling. He was bleeding money, losing contracts, and facing lawsuits. There was no escape for him. He thought he could walk away unscathed, but Haley and I made sure he didn't. Clark was destroyed, both in business and in his personal life. And watching him fall gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Not because I wanted to see him suffer, but because it proved that I had come out on top. I hadn't let him or Eliza break me. I had taken control of my life and made sure they paid for what they did. A few weeks after the dust settled, Haley and I met again. But this time, it wasn't just about plotting revenge or celebrating our small victories. It was different. We had become more than just partners in this twisted game. We had become close. Really close. Our meetings weren't filled with the same raw, angry passion as before. Now, there was something deeper between us. The sex changed too. It wasn't just wild and reckless, it became something emotional, something that felt like the start of something real. Haley understood me in a way no one else ever had, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone by my side who truly got me. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. I walked away with the house, a substantial portion of the assets, and full control of the business I had once shared with Clark. Eliza was left with nothing. She tried to rebuild her life, but without me as her safety net, she struggled. Her betrayal had cost her more than just our marriage, it had cost her everything. As for Clark, well, he wasn't much better off. Haley left him, and with the debts piling up and his reputation in tatters, he drowned in the gossip that swirled around him. His life had fallen apart, and there was no one left to help him pick up the pieces. Haley and I, on the other hand, didn't have to hide anymore. Our relationship became public, and neither of us cared what people thought. We had survived the storm, and now we were building something real together. We weren't just two broken people seeking revenge anymore. We had one. Both of us. And we were ready to move forward, leaving Eliza and Clark in the dust. I stood there, looking at everything I had gained, my freedom, my business, my future with Haley, and I felt nothing but victory. I had played the game coldly and calculated every step. And the best part? I didn't regret a single one.